Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to this full licensing committee today, the 16th of September 2021. So a warm welcome to you all, and we will start with item number 1, which is apologies. Thank you. Are there any apologies, Sarah?
We have apologies from Councillor Decent and Councillor Williams.
Thank you. And on to item 2, which gives reference to apologies. Our substitute members, please.
We have Councillor Fear substituting for Councillor Decent and Councillor Borthwick substituting for Councillor Williams.
I'm very grateful to those two councillors for being able to stand in at such short notice. So we go on then to, wait a minute. Yep. It's just decided to lose itself. We go on to item 3, declarations of interest, please. Are there any declarations of interest? If there are, can you please indicate? I'll look around the room. No declarations of interest. Thank you very much. So now, oh yes, of course. Thank you so much. I'll just ask Sarah if she would like to do housekeeping with regard to phones, etc., etc. Thank you, Sarah.
Good morning. Please note that this meeting of the Licensing Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Please could everyone present follow these ground rules. Only speak when invited to by the Chairman. If accessing via Teams, always turn on your video function when invited to speak and state your name. Please use your microphones when speaking, and please mute or turn off your microphone when you are not talking. If accessing via Teams and you would like to speak on an item, please do indicate by raising your hand in the Teams window function. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the ground floor of the multi-storey car park. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Just checking that mine is. Right. Thank you for that, Sarah. Okay, then on to item 4, which is confirmation of minutes. So we have the confirmation of Licensing Committee the 19th of May 2021 and our licensing subcommittees on the 12th, 13th and 27th of May, the 7th and 9th of June and the 21st of July and the 4th of August 2021. So are we all agreed that they are as read? Are there any amendments or any points of reference, please? If they are, please indicate. Okay, we're all happy with those. Thank you. Just to add that the private agenda pack which committee members have received includes the full subcommittee minutes in relation to exempt business and taxi hearings, and these were considered on the 27th of May and the 4th of August. So that's exempt business. So you also have those. So are we content with those? Thank you. Okay, so on then to item 5, which is our public issues. And we have a statement from Sarah Armstrong, who's a member of the public. Welcome these statements with regard to this particular policy so that all members of the public all feel that they have a voice. So Sarah's Armstrong's statement is extremely welcomed, and I will ask Sarah if she would kindly read it out. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. The following statement relates to agenda item 7 on the agenda and has been submitted by Sarah Armstrong, who is a BCP area resident. In 2010, Bournemouth was ranked among the worst 10 places in the country for sex crimes. Dorset Police said that numbers were skewed due to large numbers of people visiting the town for the clubs. With alcohol-fuelled ASB, it's difficult to attach incidents to particular venues. Yet this evidence is admissible when considering licences. Therefore, it follows that numbers of sexual assaults should be considered for SEVs. With increasing sexual assaults, Gardens, Beach and Old Christchurch Road and rising DV, the licensing board must take responsibility for the culture they are creating and the consequences for women, visitors and residents.
Thank you very much, sir. Then on to item 6, which is BCP Council Gambling Act Statement of Licensing Principles. So we are asked to consider the draft policy make amendments as required, and if so, then agree a 12-week public consultation. And our officers attending to support us in this are Andy Williams, who's Head of Safer Communities, Nananka Randall, who is our Licensing Manager, Linda Cole, who is our Senior Solicitor, and Sam Johnson, Policy and Performance Manager, especially with regard to equalities. So I'm going to ask Nananka Randall, please, our Licensing Manager, if she will present the report and take the committee through the draft policy and the appendices. Everybody has reference to these just to ensure that all systems are working. Okay, thank you, Mrs. Randall, if you would present your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I begin, I must apologise and point out an error in the list of direct consultees at Appendix 5. It is human error. I mistakenly left some legacy Bournemouth Council emails in that, and that has now been remedied, but I didn't have time to update the policy documents online. So I do apologise, but that has been addressed before anyone points it out to me as we move forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Randall. That's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay. So the Gambling Act requires all councils to produce a statement of licensing principles every 3 years. This is similar to a statement of licensing policy under the Licensing Act 2003, and the content is set out in guidance issued by the Gambling Commission. This is the first BCP Council policy, and officers have drafted this with close consideration made to the statutory guidance and the content of the now dissolved Legacy Council's previous policies. This policy sets out the expectations on local operators by the licensing authority in making applications and maintaining licenses under this policy. All operators are expected to uphold the 3 main licensing objectives, which are preventing gambling from being a source of crime and disorder, ensuring gambling is conducted in a fair and open way, and protecting children and otherwise vulnerable people from being harmed or exploited by gambling. Once agreed, this policy will be subject to a 12-week public consultation prior to being presented back to committee for consideration.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Randall. Okay, then, so we go on then to, if you would like to, did you want to expand at all with regard to taking us through the appendices, please, and taking us through the actual policy?
Okay, the appendices before you are the Appendix 1, 2 and 3 are the previous Legacy Council policies, just for reference really, so that you can see they were relatively similar. The content is quite set out and described by the Gambling Commission, and then I've put together the draft policy for your consideration. I've done it into Part A, Part B and Part C. So we've got the general statements of purpose, and then Part A talks about the overarching principles of this policy relating to the geographical area, the licensing framework, the declaration, interested parties, and most important really I think is the local risk assessments and the local area profile, which we've set out in there for operators to have regard to when they're making an application and maintaining their licenses. And then Part B goes on with regard to the premises license types that we issue, and sets out what they are. And then Part C talks about the permits that we issue. And then finally, the notices, which tend to be sort of more temporary gambling uses. And then I've just put in a glossary, and then some information with regard to gaming machines and the entitlements for clubs and pubs for information by full members. So that's sort of the general set out of the policy. If anyone's got any particular questions that they want me to expand on, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you very much, Nananka. And you'll find this, members, at 153 on mod.gov for reference. The 3 Legacy Council policies are before that. And as Nananka said, they are very similar. They have statute requirements of content that they must have in them. And this has been iterated and extended with regard to our BCP policy. So there is an index which clearly outlines all the areas that Nananka's discussed and advised us of, together, of course, with the purpose of the statement. So are there any questions or any comments, please, from the floor with regard to this? Thank you, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just possibly a typo. It may just be the way I'm reading things, but under section 11, interested parties at page 160, you have the first paragraph, then you have the bullet points, and it says, it's not very grammatically good reading. It says, defined in the Act as any person who lives sufficiently close. I think that should be resides, because it just doesn't sound right.
Yes, I think resides would be a much better word. Are members content that we just change that word? I'm not seeing any dissent. Thank you. Councillor Hadley, I can see you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, it was partly on that point. Interested parties. It's interesting that it talks about living closely and then owning a business, but it doesn't talk about people in terms of their daily lives and their wider bit than just where they live. So where they work, where they choose to play, and indeed when you get to the list of parties, it talks about port tourism, for example, which I checked there. That domain is no longer valid, so that's another incorrect email address, I'm afraid. But more importantly, that role has been taken over by the business improvement districts. And then there's a list of very few churches, which is kind of interesting as to why very specific churches, Sacred Heart at Boscombe was one of them, are mentioned, but it feels like a slightly odd list. So I guess the question is it just where people reside, if reside is the word we use, or is it, you know, the nature of the area in terms of where people are working or otherwise conducting other activities in terms of the nature of the areas?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Hadley. Mrs. Randall, if you would like to give some advice with regard to that question. Thank you.
To be fair, the wording that I've used is taken directly from the Gambling Commission guidance, to be honest. So it's open to interpretation. So if we want to add in there additional wording or to encompass a wider meaning, then that's absolutely fine, and I'm happy to do that.
Thank you,
and yeah, I'm happy to expand on the direct consultees as well if people want to suggest additional ones.
And there is, of course, a difference between statutory consultees, which are required, and direct consultees, which, of course, there's no limit to that list, and that list can be added to or removed at any stage. And I think that needs to be made quite clear. Just because we have a list in print, it doesn't mean we can't ask other people, and we can't add people in or remove people if they no longer become relevant. So are we content then, because obviously this is an opportunity for us to point out these errors and omissions and amendments, and then for an anchor to take them away and to work on them. Are we content? Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Borthwick, thank you.
Is the 12-week consultation of this policy adequate? And what form will the constitution take?
Thank you very much. Mrs. Randall, please. Thank you.
The statutory guidance advises 12 weeks, 3 months. It's quite a long time. Obviously, we can go longer if members so wish, but that is what is set down within the Gambling Commission and the guidance and best practice for this.
Okay, and Councillor Borthwick was interested to know how that consultation, what would be the content of that consultation. I think you'd like some extension on that. Thank you.
At the moment, it tends to go via the performance team by way of our website, and because of the way that this policy is, it's very difficult to ask specific questions. So it would be an open consultation, just asking people for their comments and thoughts on the policy.
Thank you very much. Are you content, Councillor Borthwick?
Just wondering when it might all start off, when it's actually going to become, you know.
Okay, could you remind Councillor Borthwick of the suggested timings if we're so disposed to agree on this today? Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you. Well, the 12-week consultation will begin as soon as as possible, and the aim would be then to bring it back to committee in the early 2022, and then go to full council after that if the policy is agreed by members.
Thank you very much. The cycle, Councillor Borthwick, would be that it comes to the March Council if we're able to get this dealt with. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Brown, thank you, and then Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just a quick question. By bringing in this, obviously it's a consultation, but when this new statement of licensing principles comes in, just in terms of, will it have any impact on existing premises licence holders, permit holders, etc., who have licences or permits under the previous Bournemouth Pool and Christchurch policies? Will they notice any difference, or that those?
Through the chair, Councillor.
Sorry, those licences just continue as they are? Will they notice any difference? Just to clarify that, just for information.
They won't, but we'll ask for, as you've asked for clarification, Councillor Brown will happily give that to you. Mrs. Randall?
There wouldn't be a particular difference. The risk assessments are already in. There's nothing new, or there's nothing new being imposed on premises. When they first get their license, that license isn't renewed, isn't updated, but they have reference to our policy if they put in a variation or anything. But all of the venues are already aware of the area risk assessments. So there is nothing new that is a new duty or onerous on these venues.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Councillor Brown. I think it's important that we clarify that point to ensure that any public listening would be assured of that. Thank you. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably only a typo, unless it's a type of betting that's been named after an area of BCP. On page 180,
yeah.
Pool betting with an E on the end.
Oh yes, Mrs. Randall, could you look to that, please?
Yeah, I'm just desperately scrolling down now. It's a lot of pages to get through, isn't it? Yeah. 180, yes. Yeah.
We've got pool with an
E.
Pool
betting, yes, as in, yeah, pool as in pool, not pool well as in spotted. The town pool. Yeah, well spotted. I do these things just to give you something to do, really. So you love it.
Obviously, any completed document would have been typo spelled, and hopefully the meaning would be clear. But thank you for that, Councillor Burton. Are there any further questions? No. Okay then. So with that said, the recommendation that sits before us today is that members consider the draft policy as presented, and thank you for your support in that, Mrs. Randall, in taking us through. And make any amendments. Sorry to interrupt.
I think Linda Cole wanted to mention something.
Mrs. Cole, if you'd like to come in, thank you. Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if it might be easier just to clarify something. So it's really going back to the interested parties, section 11.4, page 161.
Yes.
So it's saying that you can have somebody to represents a person who satisfies either of the two subparagraphs above. So they're the two interested parties. But I noticed in 11.4 it doesn't say anything about legal representation. So I was going to ask Mrs. Randall, is this what's set out in the guidance, or are we able to add anything extra? I just thought it a little bit strange that the interested parties could be represented by members of the Parliament, councillors, residents and tenants association, trade unions and trade associations, and often we may get a legal representative. Or they may want
I think Mrs. Randall advised us that she did take it directly from the Gambling Commission, but if you could further advise, Mrs. Randall, thank you. You're on mute, Mrs. Randall.
Sorry, I'm happy to add that in. Again, it's just that it's a guidance, but if we want to add extra to it, we can. That's not a problem.
Yes, thank you for that point of reference, Mrs. Cole. I think as this goes through, anybody reading these documents in greater detail, especially our professional officers, anything that comes up, to bring that forward to the committee to ensure that we're aware of what's being mooted, and I'm sure that we can agree that. Thank you for raising that point, Mrs. Cole. Is there anything further?
Well, I have just also noticed a couple of typos, but if you're content, Chair, I'll just raise them afterwards.
At this stage, yes. I mean, obviously, if it's making the meaning ridiculous, then it might be useful to point them out, like a pool and pool. But other than that, I'm sure that we'll deal with the typos as we go through. So, are you content, Mrs. Cole?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much for raising that. So then, members, back to the recommendation. I will start again. It's recommended that members consider the draft policy as presented, make any amendments they consider appropriate, as we have done, and you've noted those, Sarah. Thank you. And then agree for the 12-week required public consultation to begin as soon as is practicable. And we've seen how that has been laid out. So members, could I please see all those in favour of that recommendation, please? Can you show? Thank you. And any against? And any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Parker. And as said before, I understand your abstention in this. Okay, then. So moving on, we go to. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask that it's recorded for the minutes, please? Yes,
absolutely. You're more than welcome. Okay, so moving on then to item 7, which is our BCP sex establishment policy. We have introduced the members who are the officers who are going to be assisting us in this. And I will ask, please, for Nananka Randall to take us through the rather long and complex, but a very comprehensive report. Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so the matter before you today is to consider the first BCP Council draft sex establishment policy. This policy has been on quite a journey to get here today, so I'm just going to go through it a little bit, just for reminding members. So in December 2020, the Licensing Committee was presented with the draft by officers, which included various proposals. This was duly considered and amended by members, who then agreed to release the draft for public consultation. Once the consultation was completed, a licensing members' workshop took place to consider the consultation feedback. It also considered public space equality issues and the ongoing ENA process. The outcome of this workshop was that officers would seek engagement with those involved within the local sex establishment venues, and local crime statistics would be examined to establish if there was any local evidence of crimes associated with these premises within the BCP area. These proposals were considered on the 19th of May by the Licensing Committee, who agreed further targeted public consultation with questions separating the types of venues which was required. And this further consultation commenced in June. An all-member briefing was provided on the 29th of June to give all BCP members an opportunity to be informed about this policy and the processes being followed. Feedback from the second round of consultation included dancer responses and crime and disorder statistics was considered at a further member workshop held on the 10th of August this year. None of the dancer feedback highlighted any concerns relating to their working environment, and there was no statistical evidence to support comments alleging crime and disorder or sexual offences linked to venues. At a local level, on questioning Dorset Police, there was nothing to support these allegations that had come through via the comments and received by the public consultation. As such, members at this workshop did not suggest any further amendments to the draft policy, and that is why this is presented back to you today in the format that was sent out for public consultation in June. Members are now asked to consider the information before you within the report pack and determine if the policy needs any further amendments before finally agreeing a final version, which will be presented to full council for ratification. I can confirm that the Equalities Impact Assessment has been completed and peer reviewed by the Equalities Impact Panel, who were happy with the content subject to some amendments, which was made, and the Policy and Performance Manager is present today to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Randall. Now, we obviously have questions now from members, and I'm going to ask members, would you like me to have these questions put forward and answered, and then we go on to our debate? Yes. I think because it would certainly, I think, colour some of the debate and some of the topics which are raised, so we can assure ourselves that they get full answers evidenced on the report we have. Are we content? Okay, thank you very much. So firstly, we very much welcome these questions from members. Some of the members did attend the member seminar, but I noticed that some raising a question and attending and also a statement didn't. However, that said, these questions are very, very welcome. And we firstly have Councillor Lisa Northover. So, Councillor Northover, are you with us? You're attending remotely, are you?
I am. Can you see me? Hear me?
Oh, I can see you there. Good morning to you, Councillor Northover. If you would like to raise your question, and then you will receive a response. Thank you very much. Take your time.
Thank you. Can I draw the committee's attention to the case of Sheffield Council, who, following legal action, conceded that it had wrongly ignored objections based on the potential impact on gender equality because they treated them as moral objections and irrelevant. Can this committee assure me that the comments which have not been considered on the basis that they're objecting to venues on moral grounds are not in fact legitimate concerns from women about safety?
Thank you very much, Councillor Northover. And I have asked if Linda Cole, our Senior Legal Advisor, will respond to you to ensure that all those legalities are covered. Thank you, Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Northover. Well, obviously, I had the benefit of your question in advance, so I have prepared a response to you, which I will just read. I apologise, it is quite detailed, but I thought it was useful for everybody listening and involved in today's meeting for me to give a quite a detailed answer. So I apologise in advance for it being as long as it is. So the Sheffield City Council case referred to in your question is where the council, Sheffield City Council, acknowledged they'd failed to comply with their public sector equality duty when making a decision to grant a new SEV licence. The court found there is no direct evidence that the defendant, Sheffield City Council, has had due regard to the public sector equality duty as it's required to do so. The decision gives no indication that this has been considered, and the court found this because there was no reference to this duty in either the decision notice from the application that was being appealed, or the minutes of the meeting of Sheffield City Council's meeting. So the court found there is a tenable basis for the claimant's inference that the defendant has wrongly ignored objections based on the potential impact on gender equality, treating them as moral objections and irrelevant. What I would say to that is, I don't believe that Sheffield City Council had undertaken an equality impact assessment at all before they granted that SEV licence. So in my view, this council has not ignored their public sector equality duty and treated concerns re public safety as irrelevant or dismissed them on moral grounds. The equality impact assessment has been undertaken. The Licensing Committee and the Working Party has considered police statistics re sexual violence in the BCP area with no connection linked to existing venues, the experiences of those working in the industry, and the lack of complaints received by the council from police or members of the public re existing venues. They've looked long and hard at this policy that they're considering, sending it out for a second round of consultation and giving the opportunity to those in the industry to share their experiences, and based on the evidence before them to date, cannot say with any certainty that there is an increased risk to women of sexual harassment in the BCP area based on their gender. Today, it's another opportunity for the Licensing Committee to further consider this policy and the further responses that have come back through the second round of consultation. It's not unlawful to grant an SEV licence. We just need to consider the potential impact on gender equality. The Council's duty is to consider the impact on the vicinity and the wider society and take mitigating actions to reduce the potential impact on women. I believe these mitigating actions include considering the protections already provided for in the legislation, the fact that the licence must be renewed annually, the conditions applied to any licence granted, the compliance visits to venues that are undertaken by council officers when they are open, going back out for that second round of public consultation to give people more chance to comment, their consultation with Dorset Police, seeking opinions of those working in the industry, and then considering any complaints and information that may be received from the police, performers, members of the public, and those running the Safe Bus in Horseshoe Common. The lack of objections made at any time there is an application for the renewal of an SEV licence. I don't believe we've had any objections since at least 2015. The lack of complaints, objections and information can only allow the council to conclude that the premises are well managed and women are not at greater risk in the BCP area as a result of these venues. Women have been given the opportunity to speak, and the council's duty is to consider the impact on all women, both those who object and those who support these types of venues.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cole, for that very comprehensive answer and giving the assurance, as Councillor Northover has asked for, that the comments which have not been considered on the basis they are objecting to venues on moral grounds are not in fact legitimate concerns from women about safety. Extremely grateful to you. Moving on then to Councillor Lisa Lewis, who is unable to attend, but she's put forward a question, and I'm going to ask our clerk, please, Sarah Colwick, if she'd kindly read it out. Thank you, Sarah.
A question from Councillor Lewis. Why have the vast majority of comments against having any sexual entertainment venues, particularly from women, not been considered?
Thank you very much. And I've asked Nananka Randall if she would kindly respond to the question. Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you. The original draft policy did include the option for licensing members to set a zero limit. However, this was not included in the final draft for consultation, as the licensing committee on the 10th of December decided that this would not be an option to take forward. The proposed policy sets out clear considerations for applicants, which would naturally limit the location of any proposed venues based on the character and locality, taking into account proximity of sensitive uses. Members' workshops have considered this consultation feedback, and this meeting today is the opportunity for the full committee to further consider this feedback for consultation. But, you know, with consideration is that consultation is for consideration and it's not to dictate the decisions made by members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Randall. Moving on to question 3, which is from Councillor Beverley Dunlop. And Councillor Beverley Dunlop has asked, please, that Councillor Northover read her question. Thank you, Councillor Northover.
Thank you. This policy seeks to favour existing sexual entertainment venues, to protect them for the life of the policy, and furthermore seeks to sway the committee with threats, paragraph 26, that these venues may become nightclubs is irrelevant to this policy and no judicial review has ever succeeded. Paragraph 27 states that there is nothing in legislation to state grandfather rights cannot be used. This is incorrect. Is the committee aware that the council cannot treat pre-existing clubs any differently from new applicants? Grandfather rights would therefore breach SEV legislation and, of course, competition law.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Northover. There's a couple of questions in there. There's also a couple of statements. But I've asked Linda Cole, please, if she would respond. Thank you, Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Northover. So grandfather rights are also known as acquired rights, is a term used in licensing and any other area of law. It is neither specifically included or excluded in the legislation dealing with SEVs. The purpose is to give some transitional protection to those who acquired rights under legislation or policy when those rules are to change. The council can include grandfather rights in its policy if they choose to do so.
Mrs. Cole, you're very faint. I'm sorry. Could you please start again? I don't know if other members are having difficulty in hearing you, but you're fading out. I don't know if that's technical. It may be that your mic's not down, Mrs. Cole. On your... Yep.
I think I'm all right, but yes, I'll start again. I'm sorry about that.
Members content we start again because I think Mrs. Cole did fade out a little there. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. If you could start again.
Of course, sorry. Grandfather rights are also known as acquired rights, is a term used in licensing and any other area of law. It is neither specifically included or excluded in legislation dealing with SEVs. The purpose of grandfather rights or acquired rights is to give some transitional protection to those who have acquired rights under legislation or policy when those rules are about to change. The Council can include grandfather rights in its policy if they choose to do so. When considering an application for renewal of an SEV licence, whilst existing venues can be refused, as the licensing authority is entitled to take a fresh look and can refuse even when there has been no material change in circumstance, it must also give regard to the fact a licence is already held. A licence is considered as a possession, and the council could be put at risk of challenge if that possession is taken away without taking into account that the permission has been in place for a considerable period of time. By including grandfather rights within the policy for the life of this policy in respect of renewal applications, it is, in the absence of any evidence of concern in the respect of these specific venues, a more measured and proportionate response. There have been no objections to renewals to date, and there is no particular recent change in the character of the locality in which they operate. At the same time, the Council is giving notice to these licence holders that it may in the future look to amend its policy. If grandfather rights remain in the policy, they only apply to the character of the location as it currently exists. If on application for renewal other issues are raised by those who may object, these objections will need to be considered in the usual way by the subcommittee, and likewise if during the life of the policy there is further material change to the character of the location, then the subcommittee may decide to refuse the application for renewal.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cole. They were quite complex questions and I'm very glad they were raised, and thank you for your comprehensive response. Moving on to the fourth question, which is from Councillor Anne Filer. Councillor Filer can't join us today, so I'm going to ask our clerk, please, Sarah Colwick, if she'd read out her question. Thank you, Mrs. Colwick.
Councillor Filer's question comes in two parts. Part A, in assessing the impact of SEVs on women, bias has been shown towards the clubs by allowing them to coordinate positive feedback from hand-picked performers, one of whom is a manager of a club, about their experiences.
Could I stop you there? And we'll ask if we may, Mrs. Randall, would you answer that question, please, rather than go on to the next and we may lose the thread? Thank you.
Yes, okay. So the sex establishment venues were asked to provide feedback from performers and anyone working within the trade. And we didn't actually ask or limit the responses just to performers. We wanted to, to hear from anybody. So I'm aware that we did get a couple of responses from managers. The solicitor for Your Eyes Only put together a questionnaire and circulated this to all performers, and responses were then sent back. All performers were also given the option to contact the licensing team direct. However, none did. The solicitor for Spearmint Rhino coordinated and collated the performer responses on behalf of the operator, and the management for Wiggle were the ones that asked performers to provide feedback if they so wished. There is no evidence to support the allegation that dancers were hand-picked. I think it was just, dancers were asked for their feedback, and that's what we received.
Thank you, Mrs. Randall, for that clarification. On to part B of Councillor Filer's question. Thank you, Mrs. Colwick.
Is the committee aware that the council's public sector equality duty means they must consider the impact on all women, not only in the clubs but in the vicinity and wider society, and why has this not been done?
Thank you very much. And Mrs. Cole, if you would respond to part B, thank you.
Of course. The response really to this part of the question is very similar to a lot of the response that I gave to the original question, Councillor Northover's question. So I wasn't going to repeat myself, but it was really to give assurance that, yes, I believe the licensing committee, they should be aware that their public sector equality duty includes impact on all of the women in the vicinity and the wider society. And I believe that they do, and this has been done by consideration of the evidence before them to date.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cole. Thank you very much, members, for your questions. I'm sure that they will assist in our debate once we have heard the statements now from other members. So the first statement is a statement from Councillor Sandra Moore. Councillor Moore is unable to be with us, so I will ask our clerk, Mrs. Colwick, if she would kindly read out the statement. Thank you.
Statement from Councillor Sandra Moore. I'm against having sex establishments, lap dancing clubs, shops, etc. in this locality because I want to live in a family-friendly area, and sex establishments, shops, lap dancing clubs, etc. are not family-friendly. I also want to attract more families to visit the area, as families are less likely to want to camp on the beach, get drunk, engage in antisocial behaviour, drop litter on the beach rather than put it in the bins and wee in alleyways. I want to attract family-friendly visitors because I object to spending huge amounts of money cleaning up the area after non-family friendly visitors have left. Objecting to sex establishments is one step towards this area becoming more family-friendly and is likely to lead to savings in the cleansing budget. I also don't want to be known as a council who can't protect its own residents from sexual harassment. Having a policy, etc. does nothing practical to help actual sexual harassment from men gathering outside a sex establishment whatsoever. If you're walking nearby, you will experience it. Most of us have been victims of sexual harassment at some time or other, and a paper policy is not going to stop someone leering or propositioning you outside a sex establishment. It happens. This is harassment and we should not have to put up with it. This has nothing to do with morals, it's a practical way of reducing harassment, attracting a family-friendly environment which has the added advantage of saving money.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Colwick. You'll note that all statements that have been made have been allowed to be stated in their entirety, which I think is only fair. There may be some inaccuracies, but it's only fair that members are given the opportunity to state how they feel. Thank you very much for that statement. Moving on then to the second statement, which is from Councillor Lisa Northover. And Councillor Northover, I hope is still with us. So Councillor Northover, if you'd like to read your statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking today to ask this committee to amend the policy for sex entertainment venues by capping the number of premises at 0. The reason for this is simple. The Equality Impact Assessment and the consultation finds that many women do not feel safe to be in the vicinity of these establishments. This is a real fear. I know this because I've experienced sexual harassment from the customers leaving those establishments, and so have others. The suggested mitigation for this in the Equality Impact Assessment is that wardens and the safe bus. However, both of these have been in place for a long time and neither stopped me getting propositioned, nor the woman with her 7-year-old daughter who reported an incident in the consultation. While women are fearful of passing by these establishments and they won't phone the police about them, we are not meeting our obligation under the Equality Act or our public sector duty to consider the wider impact on women and girls. It cannot therefore be lawful to licence such a business anywhere in the BCP area, as women and girls have a right to feel safe everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Northover. Moving on then to Councillor Lisa Lewis, who's also given us a statement, and Councillor Lisa Lewis can't be with us today, so I've asked our clerk, Sarah Colwick, if she'd kindly read out a statement. Thank you, Mrs. Colwick.
A statement from Councillor Lewis. Sexual violence against women and girls is an epidemic driven mainly by the sex industry. Pornhub provides easily accessible videos of females being beaten, choked and sexually abused, many of them real. This sexual abuse is replayed in secondary schools and now primary schools. SEVs are part of this industry that dehumanises women and exploits us as commodities, negatively impacting all women. This policy is simply a licence for men to buy sexual services from women, and if you approve it, you are enablers of this dehumanisation and commodification. Is this the message you really want to send to women?
Thank you very much. There was a question there in the statement, but something that we can discuss at a later stage. Thank you very much for that. So moving on then to our last statement, which is from Councillor Simon Bull. I know that Councillor Simon Bull was hoping to join us, but I don't believe he's with us, is he? Okay, thank you. So as he's absent, we will ask that Mrs. Colwick please read out Councillor Bull's statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Statement from Councillor Bull. I am very concerned that the committee is disregarding comments on the basis that they consider them to be on moral grounds and not taking into account that these objections may well be legitimate concerns about safety and gender equality.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So that concludes the 4 questions and the 4 statements. So we now move on then to questions and debate. And I already have an early indication. Councillor Burton, thank you.
I was just a request, Chair, thank you. Councillor Moore asked me to pass on her apologies to you because she particularly wanted to attend this morning, but she had a community engagement.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you very much. Happily accepted. Thank you. Okay, so, sorry, not an indication then that Councillor Burton wishes to speak at this moment on the item, but we have Councillor Dove. Councillor Dove, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I wondered if it was appropriate, please, to ask an officer a question. A lot of the debate today will be about the consultation and how we've taken that the feedback into consideration and whether it's been done lawfully and appropriately. Therefore, I'd really like to ask our qualities officer in terms of his understandings to whether our due regard, which I know that our Linda Cole has sort of clarified, but the bit before that is the Brown principles and whether the consultation has been carried out purposefully, correctly, and so that we can then apply due regard appropriately when making our decisions today, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dove. Start on that premise is excellent. It gives us a very good grounding. Mr. Johnson, are you able to assist us, please? Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. In response to that question, thank you. Principles from case law and regulatory work help us to understand what must be done to show due regard.
Mr. Johnson, could you just speak a little slower, please? It's a little difficult to hear you.
Okay.
It's muffled, so if you could just speak a little slower, thank you.
Okay. I'll just turn up this volume. Bear with me a second. So it may be clearer.
Thank you. Okay.
Principles from case law and regulatory work help us to understand what must be done to show due regard and to be compliant with the general duty. The key case law principles are commonly referred to as Brown principles are often used in court to determine whether a public body has shown due regard to the equality duty. The following principles drawn from case law explain what is essential in order for the equality duty to be fulfilled. Public bodies should ensure the decision makers must be aware of their duty to have due regard to the 3 M's of the duty. I'm satisfied that they do. The decision maker must consider what information he or she has and what further information may be needed in order to give proper consideration to the duty. I believe the licensing committee has and the working group. Timeliness, the duty must be complied with before and at the time that a particular policy is under consideration or a decision is taken. That is in the development of the policy options and in making a final decision. A public body therefore cannot satisfy the duty by justifying a decision after it's been taken. The evidence before us shows that this has been the case with the different workshops and different engagement with councillors. Real consideration. Considering the 3 M's of the duty must form an integral part of the decision-making process. So it's not box ticking. It must be exercising substance with rigour and open mind in such a way that it influences the final decision. Public bodies are responsible for ensuring that any third parties which exercise functions on their behalf are capable of complying with the duty, are required to comply with it, and that they do so in practice, as the duty cannot be delegated. I believe we've done this in the way the policy is written and the call down. And finally, public bodies must have due regard to the aims of the equality duty, not only when the policy is developed, but decided upon, but also when it's implemented and reviewed. And to be clear, the equality duty is a continuing duty. So in answer to the question, I'm satisfied that BCP Council has met the duty of due regard and its responsibilities under section 149 during the development of this policy.
Thank you very much for that, Sam. Mr. Johnson, that's extremely helpful. Would you like a secondary, Councillor Dove?
Yeah, please. Thank you. If I may just carry on from the EIA, would that be okay, please?
Absolutely fine, thank you.
In the conclusion, it mentions the word positive twice, and I just wondered if we could ask our equalities officer and understand the context of what positive means within the EIA, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson, thank you. The context of positive within the EIA as it's mentioned twice. Thank you.
It's on page 325 in the conclusion of the EIA.
Thank you, Councillor Dove. 325, the conclusion of the EIA.
Yeah, in the context of it being saying it's positive, that is in reference to the mitigating actions that have been taken in the development of the policy or that can be taken if a licence is issued if the policy is agreed to reduce potential harassment of women and the reduction of any risks. So that's what makes it positive, by the mitigating actions that are placed within the policy and the options open to the Licence Committee to revoke licences.
Thank you. Could you just state those 2 points again, please, for clarification for the committee?
The mitigating, where it says positive in the impact assessment, where the policy is positive, it's about the mitigating actions that's been taken to reduce any potential harassment of women. And it's also about risk reduction, and where the Licence Committee have the opportunity, if the policy goes forward, to withdraw a licence or to call it back in. And also the conditions under which the licensee must operate. So it's all the mitigating actions that are taken to ensure that people can operate in a safe environment and be free from potential harassment, as the evidence we have to date doesn't show that there's been any harassment related to these premises in the BCP Council area.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Councillor Dove. So we seem to be on equalities impact assessment at the moment, which is a finite area. Are there any further questions with regard to the EIA? Well, I think that we've had a comprehensive answer with regard to its assurity from Mr. Johnson. Are there any further questions? Are you content? Okay, thank you, members. I'd like then to go on to any other further questions or comments on the floor with regard to the policy. Councillor Farquhar, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. On page 8 and on page 190 of the policy itself, on the majority of cases of workers within SEVs felt, and I'm quoting, felt safe and secure and did not feel exploited. My question on that is, can we have a reminder of the safeguarding that the council took to inquire as regards those individuals that were not making up the majority of respondents, because it says the majority of cases, and what the outcome of that safeguarding exercise was?
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Yes, this is an area which I also have raised with our case officer, and it is perhaps not the best of wording, but the wording went out in this context. So I will ask Mrs. Randall, please, if she would like to explain with regard to the majority of cases and the feedback and exactly what this means by definition. Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you. Yes, obviously this is from my report that I presented to members. All of the responses from dancers is within the appendix 4, and it may well be that my wording is slightly misleading, but I didn't want to state all dancers said in their feedback that they felt safe and secure, because not all dancers used that wording, but most of the dancers did use the wording that they felt safe and secure within their working environment, which is why I use the word the majority. That does not imply that the minority said they did not feel, they just were silent on that matter.
Thank you, Mrs. Randall. Or indeed, as we've all read those letters, they said it in a different way, but it was the words safe and secure which were pertinent, which you were being very careful, the minutiae of detail you were going in. You didn't want to make a statement which was unfair. So I think that may assist you, Councillor Farquhar, in understanding that it wasn't that people didn't feel safe and secure, it was that they used other wording or they didn't allude specific to that in their letters to BCP Council. Is that helpful?
It is, Chair. Thank you very much. May I ask another question?
Of course you may.
So I see in the report that the individuals working within the SEVs are self-employed, so they don't enjoy the normal rights and entitlements enjoyed by workers who are actually employed. My question is, what opportunity is there within the policy to allow for whistleblowing for individuals that are self-employed within sex establishment venues, or sex entertainment venues, SEVs, to actually bring to the attention of the authorities, including the local authority and the licensing authority, should things not be going as expected?
Thank you very much, Councillor Barker. Well, obviously that type of arrangement would be contractual, but I will ask Mrs. Cole if she'd like to comment, please. Thank you.
I haven't got an exact legal answer to that question. I mean, the policy contains lots of conditions about welfare, about dancers, and they would be encouraged on compliance visits that the staff may make, you know, while they're keeping an eye out for particular issues about what's going on. And but as far as their employment status is concerned, we wouldn't be involved in that. I mean, if there was a particular issue that the council became aware of generally, then it would be something that we may be able to pick up on. All the evidence before us is just what we've got from those dancers, and they quite enjoy being self-employed, working as many or as few hours as they wish to.
Yes, thank you.
I haven't got a further answer for that, Chair. I'm sorry, Councillor.
Thank you, Mrs. Cole. Yes, I think we could look to evidence there in those letters, those 26 letters that we received, where the dancers were stating that the self-employment suited them because a lot of them actually did other things, were professional individuals in other ways, and they were happy with that. And Councillor Parker, I think to answer your question, it's it's difficult for Mrs. Cole to answer, because with regard to BCP, we don't really have an overarching responsibility, but it would be contractual within any contractual agreement that may occur between the clubs and the individuals as to how they might deal with something if they were not happy. But indeed, if something came to our notice, I can assure you, Councillor Parker, that we would deal with it expediently. But it's not something that we can provide for.
If I may, Chair, can I ask a follow-up question relating to the local authority? The majority of individuals working for the local authority will be employees, so therefore they will enjoy, to my understanding, the protections which are offered under a whistleblowing policy. The individuals working within SEVs are self-employed, therefore they don't. What I'm asking is there not a missed opportunity here for the licensing authority to give them an avenue for a form of whistleblowing, which would be removed from contractual obligations between the individual self-employed and the organisation or the establishment that actually employs them on a self-employed basis?
I think you've had your answer, Councillor Farquhar, that it is not possible to do this, but I will revert again to either perhaps Mrs. Cole or Mrs. Randall as to whether you might be able to advise further, but I think that Councillor Farquhar has had his answer. Mrs. Cole?
Well, the only thing, I mean, if it is wanted, I mean, I'm sure we could include something in the section in the policy under the dancers' sort of welfare, and, you know, just put in there that we encourage all dancers to contact the local authority if there is a particular issue about their employment, and it might be just something that we may be able to assist with. But as they are self-employed, if they don't like the employment and the terms of it, we understand they just leave and find another club to move to. They've always, I mean, they're not contractually employed, so they don't have to stay. I mean, I don't want to sound...
No, I think that's very helpful, actually, and I think Councillor Farquhar, his point is well made, and if we're able to put something in that does encourage that, I think that would only be fair and totally acceptable. But obviously, it's not that we don't have any power, but we can certainly put something in there which would encourage that, and that they would be aware that they can come to us and can have that conversation if they so wish. So I think that Councillor Farquhar's point in that manner is well made, and I'm sure members would be happy with that. I'll just, is this with relevance to this, Councillor Dove? One moment, Councillor Farquhar, I'll just ask Councillor Dove to come in. Thank you, Councillor Dove.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand the role of the licensing officers in all of this, because as I understand it, whether it's in relation specifically to SEVs or any other area which is licensed, such as taxis, etc., that we do have recourse via the licensing officers to anyone who wishes to make complaints. We have had this before with SEVs in particular about how customers, particularly vulnerable customers, have been treated, and they were able to come to the licensing officers. Everything was fully investigated, and we had a hearing on the back of that. So would that perhaps be part of, whilst it's not whistleblowing, there is a recourse and a path of recourse for operators who aren't acting responsibly to be addressed and dealt with.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's materially stated, Councillor Dove, and thank you for that reminder with regard to complaints procedure. So I think that we can be assured of that. But I think that added line there to give dancers encouragement, I can't see that that would do any harm if members are so content. Thank you for that timely reminder, Councillor Dove. Are we so content then that we put something in there? We are indeed. So, Mrs. Randall, if you were able to put a form of wording in there that would support Councillor Farquhar's concerns as supported by the membership. Thank you.
Yeah, what I could also look at doing is, because obviously the policy relates to the regulation of the premises. So, you know, the conditions are for the premises. They're not conditions on the dancers per se. But what we can do is maybe beef up some of our information on our website to make it easier for everybody to make a complaint directly to us, and that would allow them a little bit of ease, and we can advertise that as well.
Yeah, that would be excellent. The ease of reference always good. Thank you so much. Thank you for raising that, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Burton, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. My point is about the terminology which we've already heard today. It's also on page 217, 10.4 of the document, grandfather rights. I'm not going to make the obvious point as whether we have grandmother rights or whether grandmothers would like to be called grandfathers. But it's just where the term comes from, which I'm uneasy about, because I think grandfather rights comes from the grandfather clause, from the famous Jim Crow laws in the United States, which were there to stop suffrage of African Americans. Could we use acquired rights like has been used already, or legacy rights in our documents, rather than that particular term?
Thank you very much for that background. I think I will ask Linda Cole. This is a colloquial phrase which is perhaps bandied about and used. If it was felt that it wasn't appropriate and that we should use, what was your suggestion, Councillor Burton?
Well, we've already heard acquired rights.
Acquired rights. So if we were to
legacy
use
rights is another term.
Thank you. If we could have comment on that, please, Mrs. Cole, and then we'll look to members as to what their thoughts are. To not use is rather antiquated, but well known and well understood phrase in the industry, as some of the background may cause unease, and whether we should actually change all the verbiage to acquired rights. Thank you, Mrs. Cole.
Yes, I mean, as the chair has said, grandfather rights, it is a colloquial term, and it was used when the Licensing Act 2003 was introduced, which is probably why we just automatically use that word here. But acquired rights is another well-known term for this type of situation, so I would have no objection to changing it to acquired rights if that's what you choose to do.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hadley, is this with relevance to this point?
It's with relevance to grandfather rights.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. We'll come back to you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Hadley, thank you. Yeah,
I mean, I suppose my point was actually on page 194, sections 24, 25 and 26 discusses the acquired rights, if we're using that term, grandfather rights, in terms of whether it's something that we would wish to grant. And it's interesting, if you go back to Councillor Morrow's statement, which is to suggest that we should have a zero level of SEVs in the conurbation. It seems that Blackpool, in setting a zero level, have given acquired rights to the existing clubs, which basically means that they can continue until they change. So it seems to me the two are tied together. So I'm not even sure whether acquired rights is relevant unless we were to set a zero level. And in terms of this being the second draft of the policy and going to full council for adoption, there's a whole discussion element within the document which needs to be resolved and come out, I think, around whether acquired rights is something we would wish to promote.
Yes, well, that's something which obviously is a matter for this committee, and as to whether we wish to do that or not, we're discussing today. I will ask for comment, please, from Mrs. Cole with regards to the Blackpool case, please, and the acquired rights for the extent of the time that the policy would run until renewal. Thank you, Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are various local authorities that have changed and put a zero limit to, or a nil limit to sex establishments in their areas, and legitimately it is something that you can consider doing. Many of those authorities, though, when introducing that 0 minute, have given grandfather rights or acquired rights to existing premises. So that is quite common, and that's just to protect the council against the fact that that licence is considered to be a possession. So it is, yes, something, if you chose to change this policy to set a 0 limit, you could also consider giving the acquired rights, grandfather rights, to existing premises going forward. That there isn't a problem with that.
So it's very much, thank you, Mrs. Cole, it's very much dependent on what the committee decides today as to how we would amend that or change that, but it has capacity to be changed. Okay.
Yes,
sorry,
all decisions. Yes, as a committee, you know, all decisions are yours to make today in whatever way. I mean, the only thing I would say, and that this isn't to put any changes off, if we make substantial changes to this draft, we will have to go back out to further consultation. That's just the way it is. So, you know, that's fine. It's just we can't make very major changes without not consulting. So that's just part of the progress of the policy as we consider every change, and that's quite common. Other local authorities that are making substantial changes, they have to go out, and they've been out to a number of rounds of consultation.
As of course have we. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Cole. A secondary, Councillor Hadley, or a third?
Yes, thank you. It was specifically and you've mentioned it twice now, Mrs. Cole. The idea that these licences have a value. As I understand, we license these venues on an annual basis, and they may consider there's value to them in the same way that taxi drivers consider there's a value to having a licence, and they exchange that, you know, that they sell them on. But I'm not sure, as a licensing authority, that we should necessarily accept that you know, that value beyond that we've given them a licence for a year, and that they should be considered on equal footing in subsequent years. It does come back to those acquired rights. You know, the precedent of you've already had one. If the nature, and it's in the document, if the nature of the area changes, more residential or a school open or something like that in the vicinity, then it should be looked at afresh. So I'm not sure that us as an authority should be accepting the idea that there's a value to the licence that's beyond, you know, that's what different businesses might consider if they wanted to change hands in the middle of a year.
Mrs. Cole, would you like to refresh the committee that you've already advised us that it's deemed in law that the licence is a possession, deemed in law to be a possession, and therefore as a possession all possessions have value? Could you please iterate and explain? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, of course, Chair. You know that is quite right. In the same way that in case law, it's been deemed that local authorities, the licensing committee, can look afresh every year at the license application, at the renewal. They can look afresh, but case law has also said that regard has got to be given to the fact that premises already has a license, and so that's got to be taken into account. And yes, case law has also told us that a license is considered to be a possession. So all I'm pointing out is there could be a risk of challenge if we take this possession away for no good reason, take it away suddenly. But that's in your gift. If that's what you choose to do, then you're entitled to do that. I'm just sort of rounding up and pointing out, you know, what may happen and the risk that you may face, but not to say that it can't be done.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cole. I'll come back to Councillor Burton. Did you want to come in with any secondary, or you were content? You're rather cut off in the past there.
Yeah, well, I do feel that we sort of drifted away from where, and to carry on the drift. Blackpool, much smaller authority, has got 4 sexual entertainment licenses, I think, venues, which is just sort of my notes, which I noticed because we're talking about Blackpool. Just coming back to my original point, would we be content to change the terminology?
We would, yes, and I think that we have a meeting of minds there, Councillor Burton, and thank you for raising it. It makes absolute sense. If we did actually come under the Licensing Act 2003 when it was being enacted, and I remember well the phrase grandfather rights and laughing at it and wondering whether it was gender perfect or not. But we've moved on. So if we were to change the wording to acquired rights, which makes absolute sense. It's not a huge change. I don't think it makes any substantive difference to the policy other than clear definition. Are we content? We are. So if we could have that change, thank you very much, Councillor Burton. So carrying on, before I come back to you, Councillor Farquhar, because you have spoken, are there any other members that would like to speak who haven't spoken at this moment in time? Raise any points? Okay, thank you, Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. I think that was a very interesting debate, triggered by the blocking of the suffrage movement, and I think that's particularly significant. I feel a motion coming on relating to having a zero policy. You did ask a question of the officers as regards the length of term that this policy would be in place, and I think that's important because the acquired rights within this policy mean that the licenses would be viewed to be renewed each year for the term of the policy. So before myself or Councillor Hadley sort of proposes a motion, then could we know how long that this policy will be actually in place for any members of the public that are actually viewing?
Well, it's clearly stated on the policy, but of course I will ask Mrs. Randall, for the purposes of the public, if you could answer that, please.
This is a policy for 5 years.
And it will start from
when it's adopted at full council.
Yeah. So 5 years from adoption, Councillor Farquhar. So we are 2021. So if this were to go to council for October, we would be speaking of 2026. Is that helpful? November. I'm so sorry, November. So it would be November 2026 when the policy would be required to be renewed once again. Is that helpful?
Absolutely, Chair. And again, it's helpful in forming the possible wording for a motion because, as Ms. Cole said, we'd be open to challenge, shall we say, from the established SEVs that are within the geography, if it was to be sprung upon them suddenly. If, however, we were to put a motion in place to say that we wish to move to a zero number of SEV licenses being granted, that wouldn't be under this policy in place until November 2026. Would I be correct in my understanding of what I should summarise there?
No, I don't think you are somehow. If you, with respect, if this committee were to so now decide that a motion put forward and we all decided that we were going to change the proposal in front of us and ask for zero, then that is what, and that were to go to council and that were to be so supported, then that is what we would have. The policy won't run and then change. So I'll just ask for further explanation, I think, which might be helpful to everybody in the room so we better understand it. Mrs. Randall, would you like to just clarify those points that Councillor Farquhar has kindly raised? Thank you.
Thank you. I think Linda Cole actually has got her hand up to speak, so maybe she wants to.
Mrs. Cole, you're in first.
Legal,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Randall. Mrs. Cole, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Whatever policy you finish as your draft after today's debate or further debate if it's needed and recommended to full council, that is the policy that will be in place for the 5 years. If you chose to change to a zero premises, that would be the policy that would be going to full council. That's the one you'd be recommending to full council after we've done further consultation, etc., etc. So it would come in straight away as such. So on the next annual application for renewal, we would have to look at whatever policy was in force at the time. In the policy at 10.4, we're offering at the moment these grandfather or acquired rights, we're going to say now, to existing premises, and I've explained the background to that. So that's another decision you would have to make. It's whether go to 0, and another decision is, would existing premises have grandfather rights or acquired rights, or would they not? But I just wanted to clarify, so that there's no confusion among members. What has been suggested as far as the acquired rights is concerned is that what they've got acquired rights for is renewal just based on the locality, because set out in section 6 of the policy that there's quite a detailed list of things that the licensing authority will consider regarding the character and locality of a licensed premises making an application for such a license. And you've got it there, the residential premises, sensitive premises, frequented by children, etc., etc. I won't read it all out. It's all listed on page 217. So what I understood is the grandfather rights were being offered to existing premises only based on that small section, because it is true that close to those existing premises, we could already say that they may be near a residential premises, they may be near a cultural museum, theatre. So we were only saying we wouldn't not give a license based on what is there at the moment. So the fact that, for example, in the town centre with the Citrix building, it's been there for a number of years already. But if one of the premises was looking to renew their license or it was a brand new license, you may choose, based on the policy, we wouldn't give a license in the same place that they already are. So what we were offering with the acquired rights was that we would renew the annual license for the period of this license, as long as the area doesn't change substantially from what it is now. If there were any other changes and there were issues raised with the premises, or if the police had come to us about, not specifically about that place, but problems in a certain area, the evidence that we've not found so far, but if that evidence does come to light, and there is evidence in the area of sexual violence being connected to these types of venue, then you will, on that annual renewal, have the opportunity to not grant that license. So what you're granting is allowing them to have a license, even though, for example, they may be next to a residential building. But if that substantially changes, or does change during the period, if more residential premises was built, or whatever, then there will be a change year to year. So it might not be that they get their license every year up to 2026. I'm sorry, I'm probably waffling a bit now. I just hope that
I think we may be repeating ourselves, going a little bit off tangent, but I think also for your support assurance, Councillor Farquhar, in our report from Mrs. Randall, she assured us that those 3 premises were aware that we are renewing our policy. They've already been made aware of that. So it's not a case of they're suddenly going to be, told A, B, C and D at some stage. They've already been put on notice, so they are fully aware that we are considering these matters. They will have also had absolute access to all the policies that we've been putting out and the consultation, etc., and had access to be able to take part in that. So this is not new to them. They're perfectly aware about what we have on the table. So the acquired rights issue is completely known to them. So thank you for your assistance there, Linda. There's a lot in there. There's a lot of coulda, shoulda, woulda, which is, I think, what Councillor Farquhar was asking about was if we are in a position where, for instance, we were to agree today against the proposal we have in front of us that we were to go to 0, how would those acquired rights for the 3 premises that remain be disposed of? So it's a fair question, and you've certainly had a very good stab, so to speak, on the hoof to give us an answer and comprehensive at that. So I thank you for that. Councillor Kelsey, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A couple of points to come across, if I may. Firstly, I think after what Mr. Cole was saying just now about the renewals, it's interesting for the board to note that during this consultation, one of those venues, in fact, the very one that is closest to the Citrus building, has in fact renewed their licence, and there were no objections to that, neither from members of the public nor from the police. And I think it's also interesting to note that we have no comments from the police on this today, again, because they seem to be satisfied with the way the premises are run and anything that's going on in the local area. And I think that's hugely noticeable, and I think it's massively something that this board needs to take into consideration, because having had these venues in previous Bournemouth Council and sat on this licensing board for nearly 15 years now, we've never had a single objection to one of these licensed premises. What I would like to know is what is Councillor Farquhar referring to when he says about a motion, because as far as I'm aware, you cannot make a motion to a licensing board. You can only make a motion to full council. And if he was doing that, then he's missed his opportunity, because the next full council is not till way after this is going to be sorted.
Yes,
so
I thank you for that. That's an extremely, to start with, the assurances that you give and the evidence that you're bringing today is extremely useful. I think that that was perhaps a clumsy phrase, and it may have been a proposal or something that Councillor Parker would further wish to discuss.
We can't afford clumsy phrases, Chairman. We're in a very serious situation, so we need to make sure we're talking about the stuff we know about.
You're absolutely correct. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair, if I may, for...
one moment, thank you,
yes.
Councillor Farquhar, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. So I've now got Councillor Brown, and then I have Councillor Johnson. Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to my view overall about, it's been some quite useful debate actually, and it's been quite thought-provoking things I've already heard this morning and at the previous meetings and discussions and debates that we've had to develop this. For me, the difficulty is, I've heard the comments from other members, from Councillor Northover, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Moore, particularly, and it's really difficult to feel that they may ignore those concerns and to think of some way to respond positively to those sort of legitimate and the concerns that have been raised about, primarily about us not having a zero limit. For me, actually, one of the comments from Councillor Lewis about the issue around online sexual entertainment, I think, is a concern, because no matter what we discuss here about these premises and licensing and regulating these premises within our borough, the whole online sexual entertainment industry, it goes on in homes right across the area anyway, and it's not regulated by us, and it makes it difficult for us to regulate the issues that come out of that. So for me, we have a dilemma that there are strong views against these premises expressed by some members and expressed to a great extent by the consultation respondents. Roughly circa 75% disagree with our sort of policy proposal of having no limit, and I find it difficult to ignore that strength of feeling. But then we have in the report, obviously, the talk about the evidence, particularly in paragraphs 18, 19, 20 and 21 in the sort of summary about, although there's anecdotal evidence and concerns relating to sexual violence and sexual harassment, there was no sort of contemporary evidence that would support that for us. So I'd just like to ask the officers whether there's an option during this policy period, as we go forward over the next 5 years, for us to not build evidence, but to make sure that we are aware of any real contemporary evidence that supports these concerns within the areas of these premises. That can we work with Dorset Police and the Community Safety Partnership and our insights? We've got a research and insights team to maybe annually carry out some research and survey among people in these areas. That I'm sure there's a way that we can come up with a research methodology to actually make sure that, rather than talking to people who may have a particular interest in a particular view, but actually speak to the people, that may sort of be out and about in these areas in the evenings, and actually ask for their views legitimately, so that we actually can build up some kind of research base for or against this, that we need some contemporary evidence which either supports these anecdotal views or may invalidate them. I feel we need some real legitimate, solid research built up over this 5 year period if we go ahead with this no cap, so that we come next time in 5 years and we can say, actually, on the basis of the research and the surveying that we've been doing over the last 5 years, it either proves or disproves the anecdotal concerns that have been raised with us. You know, does it say, actually, we've been surveying it and we've not really found any level of concern or harassment or violence within these areas? Or do we get within 5 years' time and we say, actually, research is showing there have been a number of crimes linked to these areas. There have been a number of complaints of harassment. Dorset Police have, you know, noticed a rise in these issues, or there is evidence of women feeling concerned about going in those areas and avoid those areas, that sort of thing. I feel that we need to really monitor this over this 5-year policy period, so that when we come to look at reviewing it, we've got something legitimate that we can say, actually, we do feel for or against this zero cap because of the basis of this evidence. So I just feel we're lacking evidence. We're told here there's no solid evidence to support those anecdotal concerns, but I just feel that we need to build that up over the next 5-year period. So I don't know whether officers can comment whether that's possible to do during this policy period.
Yes, it's a bit chicken and egg though, isn't it? I totally understand your sentiment. And I'm certainly going to ask Mr. Williams, Mr. Andrew Williams, because he is the gentleman of the statistics and who has materially, evidentially proved that those anecdotal information is not panned out. With regard to review and overview, it may be something that we can obviously have reviewed or overviewed, but there will be fiscal implications and it's to what we already have in place. So I will ask Mr. Andrews, would you like to comment and to give some assurance to Councillor Brown as to what is the possible? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brown, for your question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like to reassure all members that sexual violence against women and girls is a key priority for the Community Safety Partnership across BCP. It's something that we're developing our plans around. There's specific police activities going on in relation to the nighttime economy as well as some measures that we've putting in place in relation to violence against women and girls. But yes, I think this is the first time that we've considered the crime statistics as part of the Equalities Impact Assessment for this policy. We did have one of our community safety analysts research any crimes linked to these 3 venues in Bournemouth, and they found one specific crime relating to violence against women and girls linked to these venues. So it's difficult
Could you further define what that was? Because when you use that emotive language, violent crime, that could be a murder or it could be something lesser. So could you define what that crime actually was? Thank you, Mr. Williams.
It was actually just a common assault. It was somebody who slapped a customer who slapped the backside of one of the dancers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Which, known as a common assault, obviously a serious incident in that respect.
Absolutely.
But we can and we will, I think, undertake further research into the activities. I think there's the work that we can do as this policy develops and as these licensed premises renew their licenses as well. If there are objections, if there are issues that are linked to these premises, then we will obviously review those at the time. But yes, I can assure members that further research will be undertaken during the lifetime of this policy into issues around sexual harassment, into issues around violence against women and girls, and we'll make sure that any issues linked to these particular policies, these particular premises, are considered.
Thank you very much. I'll bring you back in, Councillor Brown, and then I'll wrap up on this particular item. Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for those comments. There will be sort of ongoing research to look into these issues, because I think it's telling, isn't it, that in the report and in your comments there, you talked about one reported crime, and I emphasise that word, one reported item of sexual violence linked to these venues. And I think for me that's the issue, that actually we all know that a lot of these things, whether it's actual crimes or whether it's concerns or feeling uncomfortable or being harassed, many, probably the vast majority, go unreported, and people just either don't go to those areas or, you know, go home and get on with their lives. And I just think that for me, it's that unreported element, the anecdotal element that has come out in our consultation about the concerns around these venues, that I think we need to be able to satisfy ourselves about, having done some research and surveying over this policy period, that could draw out any of that kind of unreported issue, that anecdotal issue, to know whether it is of significance and needs to direct our sort of policy.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Yes, indeed. And I think we've heard from Mr. Williams, who has enlightened us with regard to the Community Safety Partnership and the work now they're taking on with regard to violence against women and girls, which is extremely important. I think it might be perhaps something which is possible that as that work progresses, that we could ask for a report to come to licensing. And if there's anything specific around our licenses premises, that could also be raised. Would that be possible, Mr. Williams? I think that would give the membership here some assurance that we were managing to keep an overview of your work.
Yes, I think that would be possible.
Okay, so we can certainly enter that onto the forward plan. Would that be helpful, Councillor Brown?
That would be really useful.
Thank you very much
for your question. To do this and then just sit here for 5 years and come back in 5 years. We need to monitor ongoing.
It ensures we keep a watching brief. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Dove?
Yes, thank you, and I'm grateful for Councillor Brown for raising the points that he did. I had wanted to speak about some of the wording in the documentation. I wasn't sure when to do it. I think perhaps for what Councillor Brown has said, it may be appropriate to do it now. There is the continual use of the word only in relation to offences that have happened. So only 15% of the nighttime economy and only one offence against performers. I think we need to take those words out. It mitigates and demonstrates potentially that we find this level acceptable, and as in the borough, we absolutely do not. So can we remove that, please?
I would agree. It is something I actually have here to raise, so you beat me to it, Councillor Dove. I think that clarification is unnecessary. We just put what the stat is and leave it at that. So are members so content that we remove the word only because it gives an inference which is unpalatable, really? Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Hadley, did you indicate?
Yes, I did. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, it was partly on that point, and that only was one of the things I was going to cover. But I think it's the difference between the experience of the dancers, and it's good to know that they feel confident and comfortable in the trade they've chosen, and the experience of other people. And we had 3 direct and personal views from councillors of the harassment they feel they have in going past these venues, and the nature of the town, and the impact on other aspects. So I think some of the evidence is out there. It's out there in the consultation, and the overwhelming number of people who didn't feel it was part of building a nice place to be, and the values that we as a council are trying to put forward for the area. And I think that is significant, and it's a bit like road danger. If you only count the number of deaths on the road, then you're not counting why people avoid going down the road or avoid certain modes of transport. And it's a similar sort of thing. I think the dancers are ferried home in security and feel safe because of that. Other people, particularly women, going out don't feel so safe, and that 15% actually is significant, because you think about domestic violence as will be in that the 85%, that people going off for a night out, enjoying the evening, and then finding it all going horribly wrong. We should be doing what we can to mitigate that.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that work has certainly come to light with regards to this policy and its journey, and reflected by the Community Safety Partnership now taking it very seriously towards the violence towards women and girls out there in the nighttime economy, and actually putting in place a process which is now going to look to, as you say, Councillor Hadley, to attempt to mitigate that, working with all our partners to hopefully bring that to bear. So thank you very much for that point. Councillor Johnson, I believe you indicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite an interesting one, in that, as a member of the working party, there are a lot of things that have been said, and I just wanted to air out a couple of them that haven't been mentioned yet. And one of them is the accusation that some of the comments within the consultation were disregarded. And we've obviously heard from Mrs. Cole that wasn't the case, but from a personal point of view, I wanted to make it sure that all members knew that we didn't just ignore all of the comments. We looked through them in incredible detail. And but one point that has to be made is that whilst we cannot disregard the comments against these venues in general, we cannot then disregard the comments in favour of these venues. We have to look at both sides. The basic point is that these are legal and licensable activities and venues, and we are a licensing committee. You know, we have to look at that, and we cannot just, you know, we cannot get trapped in the wider debate about the place that these venues have in our society. We're looking at BCP, we're looking at our local licensing and the evidence that we've got for or against a nil cap or no cap in our area. The issue with looking for evidence, looking for a certain type of evidence, is that if that evidence is not there, we end up looking further and further and further and digging deeper and deeper and deeper until we desperately try and find something that supports our conclusion. The evidence that we have in front of us today is that there is little to nothing to say that there should be a nil cap within our area. And we can only look at what we've got in front of us. If there is an issue, it must be found and it must be eradicated. But as from all the evidence that we can see here, there isn't enough of an issue here for us to deny any venues within our conurbation. And you know, another thing is there are accusations of coercion and coordinated responses from the dancers from the venues, but there was also evidence of that coming from the other side of the argument. People trying to get lobbyists to come in and speak on this issue, which I believe you quite rightly said no to, Chair, because we would have had to have set up a similar thing from the other point of view, allowed the venues to come in and give a talk in that way. You know, this always will be a balanced decision. But I think that the way the policy is written with the changes that have been quite rightly made today, I think it's the best way to go. I think that we have to look forward and we have to ensure that whilst this policy is in place, we do look forward. We do look for any evidence that there is an issue and we bring it to light and we tackle it immediately. But at the moment, there just isn't that evidence. And this policy is the best way to go, I believe. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that summary. It's extremely helpful, especially around when you have those juxtaposed positions. What exactly do? You can just cause more issue rather than dealing with the robust consultative process that we have put in front of us. And you're quite right, Councillor Johnson, we looked at every single one, all 201 and then all 174, whether they were right, wrong or indifferent, we looked at them. Whether they were moralist or not moralist, they still were worthy of looking at because people had taken the time, because they felt passionate, they were upset, fearful, they wanted us to understand how they felt, and we certainly looked at everyone, minutiae of detail, and we had officer support and professional opinion as we went through each one. I hope that gives some assurance. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Councillor Borthwick, thank you.
Yes, Chair, I just, is it a little bit concerned of lack of objections? It doesn't seem to have been many. I've not been to licensing before, but is the public out there really satisfied that we're going to do the best job possible? Because, you know, changing times and everything else. So I just think to myself, why is that lack of objections? Is it too technical? Are we too busy in our lives to worry about this type of thing? It's, we turn over a lot of money in this entertainment. And I just wonder why there's a lack of objections, or am I wrong?
Well, no, well, it's a moot point, really, isn't it? Why are there a lack of objections? Well, the actual applications are well put out. They're put out locally so that people can see them. They're in the local press. Those people who would have an interest, the lobbyist who Councillor Johnson referred to, would certainly be keeping their eye, I would imagine, on the press and keeping their eye on the website as to when these came up. But there have been no objections. So that is that. And I would understand it to be from that people do not have a concern. Ergo, we have no objections. It's rather mute. It's a sort of, have you stopped beating your wife? I can't really answer it for you, really, and I don't think anybody can. But I think that we continue to ensure that we advertise correctly and that people are aware they have an opportunity. But I would expect our lobbyists group and those who have deep concerns about this to be aware of when these renewals are coming up and to be keeping an eye, because that is their opportunity to object. I hope that helps.
So it's not the end of the story then?
Not indeed. Thank
Okay,
you, Councillor.
thank you.
Councillor Dove?
Thank you, and I'm sorry I'm going to dominate this meeting, but I am going to, if we can, refer to the policy or ask that we look at the policy in particular at some point. These discussions are really helpful. That, of course, they provide the context in which we're making our decision, but we need to review the policy as well as. And I've got, as you can imagine, quite a few points that I need to go through and examine and explore, probably with those that were on the working committee, to see how we've come to the policy that we've come to, which is being presented to us today. I appreciate maybe getting into the weeds, but this is a legal document upon which legal decisions are going to be made, and the devil is in that detail. And I don't really want to take over your meeting, Chair, so I'm just sort of giving you a heads up that there is some stuff that I'd like to go through, and it's entirely up to you as to how you would like to do it.
Well, I'm not aware of what that is, Councillor Dove, so you have me at a disadvantage, but please start.
If we may, could we start looking at part 11, character and locality of licensed premises?
Could you give us the page, please?
217.
Thank you very much.
It's part 11 and starts at 11.1.
Thank you. 217, members, if that's helpful. It's your little box and it takes you there, I hope. Yes, it took me straight there. Right, okay. Thank you, Councillor Duff. You'd like to continue?
Yeah, I'd like to understand how we've come up with the list under 11.2, how these various bullet points have been arrived at, the reasoning and rationale behind it, and what alternative options it then leaves, and as a result, the impact of where these venues go if all of these bullet points are to be accepted and adopted in full.
Okay, thank you. I can certainly answer with regard to the list of that we have put together. There's no limit to this list. This list doesn't have a limit. It's not a statutorily provided list, as we touched on earlier. So this list can be added to. So it's not just this list. And these were suggestions put forward from members and also then clarified by our case officer and legal. But I will refer to Mrs. Cole and to Mrs. Randall with regard to your further inquiries. Thank you.
Well, I'll start, but I think there was a draft, the very first policy that came before the licensing committee in December. That had the basic draft, and then this list was sort of discussed at that meeting in December, and expanded as members raised different things that they would want to include in it that would have to be considered regarding proximity when any application became into the licensing authority. So that's Mrs. Randall will be able to give any more detail, but that's my understanding of it. It started as a list that was then further discussed and added to by members at the licensing committee on the 10th of December.
Thank you. I'll bring in Councillor Kelsey actually at this point, because Councillor Kelsey was a member of the working party, as was I, and Councillor Johnson and Councillor Bagwell. Who was the fifth member? Totally gone.
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Williams, who unfortunately can't be with us today, of course. Yes. Thank you, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wonder if on that, having listened to what Councillor Dobbs just said, if it may be easier if we inserted under the paragraph, it says the application will be inappropriate having regard to its proximity to, maybe if we add, for example.
Yes, indeed, because the list is
and
not
then that
limitless.
gives an example of the types of premises.
I think that would be helpful. Councillor Doug.
I just think, well, my point is, surely we have to agree whether or not it is inappropriate firstly, and I think this is too restrictive, and therefore the cumulative effect and impact by adopting this in full will actually be a policy which will not protect our people that have been attending these places, will not protect the actual establishments and the venues, and in particular will not protect those performers who work within those clubs. When you look at all of this, and I've been looking and I've been doing my research, and I've found some policy documents where all of these areas and examples have been applied, you can see that there is only one area where these venues can go, which is industrial estates. So therefore, the mitigation that we have put in place, which is so to consider the safeguards already in place to prevent threat, risk and harm due to a vibrant nighttime economy, such as the health bus, the pastors, etc., that won't be in place. They'll be in industrial estates where there is no police presence, there are no PCSOs, there are no community wardens, there's no health buses, there's no pastors. What you will have is darkened areas which are frequented by men in stained raincoats who are going there to curb crawl, because that's actually where sex workers also operate. If there's no cap, we are going to have no-go areas which during the hours of darkness will end up becoming kind of sexual areas. I don't think that's what we really want for our conurbation. So I'm really concerned about this list without any caveats. So I understand schools and playgrounds, etc. But then if you look at the anecdotal evidence in the research papers, they are not open when children are frequenting these areas. We have to be very clear and very strict that there is no advertisement, that we absolutely, when we walk past during the hours of daylight, we have no idea what that venue is offering. And to be fair, I had no idea where our sexual entertainment venues were until I joined licensing in 2015. I used to walk past and still walk past with my children. So I'm really concerned that we have this list here, what it then means for where they have to then go if we open it up. And I think the risk to our performers who we are trying to protect is too great, and I just can't accept it as it is at the moment.
So what is it that you can't accept, Councillor Dunn? You can't accept the list per se, or that this is that there's no limit to the list?
I can't accept things. So where it talks about frequented by children, we have to understand the opening hours of these clubs. You know, why can it not go by a hospital, community centres, libraries, parks? So that Horseshoe Common, for example, is directly opposite one of these venues. Where's the correlation? What is it that a cinema or a theatre brings, which is going to be affected by having this venue next door? Shops used and directed by families and children, tourist attractions. What is the rationale? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Okay, thank you for that question. It may have been helpful if this had been brought to the committee earlier, but you.
So to be fair, Chair, I'd raised it at the working groups that we had gone to. I raised it at the last meeting. It hasn't been changed. Okay, thank you. Mrs. Randall.
To be honest with you, I don't really know what to say. This relates only to new applications, so we're not considering the current venues. These are the types of things that we would consider when we are looking at a new application before us. If we get a new application, this isn't a growing growth industry. I mean, we haven't had a new application, certainly in the BCP area, for, well, since I've been manager, probably for the last 10 years or so. So, you know, members wanted this list to ensure that any new applications did not go into areas where the contentious nature and the security of families and women could well be impacted. I understand what you're saying about you know, on the flip side, we're then moving them to sort of slightly maybe out of town areas. But again, on that application, the types of things that you're talking about, lighting, security of workers, that would all have to be dealt with at the time of any application, because each application is on its own merits. So it's not necessary that we'd say, well, it ticks all these boxes, we're not going to allow it. It would come to committee for discussion and consideration, and slightly further on down, you know, in section 12, we do talk about the layout, character and condition of any venue. So on the grant of them, we are considering, you know, what is the layout of the venue, what is its location, the character and the condition of it. So we would look at external lighting, parking for performers. So it's not a one, that little bit is in isolation of the whole policy. So I don't know if that gives you any comfort at all, Councillor Dove.
That's extremely useful, because Councillor Dove did raise a very important point, a moot point there, that where do they go? And if they go into an isolate area that doesn't have any of those protections in place, we've already spoken of our community safety partnership, already concerned with regard to the nighttime economy, which is in a specific area. So if a nighttime economy were, as Councillor Dove has quite so rightly raised, perhaps to an industrial area, we would be able then to assure her that those protections would go with that, because obviously there'd be a requirement, because otherwise we may fall foul of there are women and girls again being in danger of being abused and harassed. So I think one goes with the other. It's not specifically stated, but obviously within the conditions and within the policies they are. I don't know if that gives you any reassurance. I'll bring Councillor Kelsey in, Councillor Dove, and then I'll bring Councillor Johnson, and then I'll come back to your good self. Is that okay? Thank you. Councillor Kelsey.
Chairman, I completely understand where Bobby's coming from. Maybe we just need to slightly change the wording here, and we have consider the character of the locality and consider whether the grant of the application would be appropriate rather than inappropriate. Because that way it would say we're looking at these premises, and would that venue then be appropriate to put in that place? At this, we're saying it's inappropriate to virtually everything, and we're going to have them on the moon rather than anywhere else. So it may well be that we need to change that to appropriate, having regard to this list below.
Yes, using the double negative doesn't help, does it? So perhaps if we were just to be very positive and to say appropriate, would that give you some assurance, Councillor Dove?
Oh, it can do. So appropriate, and then also giving regards to proximity and opening hours of the venue.
Okay, yes, I think that's fair enough. Members, are we content with that? I think it's a very fair compromise, and thank you for raising that, Councillor Dove. It certainly gives us some security and safety. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give a little further reassurance to Councillor Dove. I think when we considered it within the working party, one thing that was specifically mentioned was that we didn't want them to end up on industrial estates and out in the middle of nowhere. And I just want to reassure that this is a list of things that we would consider, but the ticking of any one of these boxes doesn't automatically then negate it. We just wanted everyone, members of the public, to know that we had considered all of these places and would consider all of these places if an application was made. It's not an exhaustive list. It's not something that's designed to rule them out of as many places as possible. But I think it goes hand in hand with the idea of no cap, of removing the cap, because when you're removing the cap, you've got to then come up with some sort of rationale to, exclude them from areas where they are inappropriate. So I think that's partly where this came from, and that was the discussion that was had amongst the working group, that we had to be quite restrictive if we didn't want them to spring up everywhere.
It's really useful. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Dove, I'll come back to you to qualify. Thank you. To sum up on that one.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Yeah, no, that's fine, and I won't talk about the cap just yet because I think that's a separate issue. But if we are going to change the previous point, then we need to consider 11.5 as a result as well, because it starts bringing in that whole family area and whether it's appropriate to include this as it is at the moment.
Okay, so going to 11.5, I'll just read it out to members for ease. As a general rule, a locality whose character falls predominantly into one or more of the following categories will generally be considered inappropriate for the grant or renewal of a sex establishment licence, and they are family and child-oriented leisure or shopping areas, including the pier approach and seafront, predominantly family residential areas with or without retail, fast food, etc., outlets serving the local population. So your concerns that sit around that. Thank you, Councillor Dove.
And specifically the first bullet point rather than the second bullet point, which I agree with entirely.
Looking specifically at the first, then your concerns, please. Thank you.
Only because, of course, that means that we would not have them where we currently have nighttime economies. So they're shopping areas, they're generally the city centres. That's where all of the support and the mitigating factors will be. The police resources will be where there are clubs and pubs. And then we could not have them in the centre of a town where people, again, it self-polices itself, doesn't it? And I think that's why I just don't like that first bullet point.
And what is your so that it is gives an assurance that it would be acceptable to you?
Does it need to be in there would be the question I asked the board today.
Okay, Got a question from Councillor Dove that does bullet point 1 as it is stated now, as it's stated, it could be stated differently perhaps, that family and child oriented leisure or shopping areas, including the pier approach and seafront, that is one of the categories will generally be considered inappropriate for the grant or renewal of a sex establishment licence. There is the caveat there, generally be considered, so there is some flexibility in its consideration. I don't know if that gives you some assurance, but what are members' thoughts, please? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I do think Councillor Dove just does raise a point on this one, actually, in that wording does open it up, and you could easily argue that the place where they are, I think perhaps a slightly, if we took out perhaps the, perhaps even just the examples that are there, because if we take out the examples, then perhaps the wording is more open. And family and child oriented leisure or shopping areas, is that if we perhaps put instead of or leisure and shopping centres, to make sure that shopping areas cannot be taken without the family and child oriented part. So if it was family and child oriented leisure and shopping areas, so they all come under one, perhaps that will eliminate some of the confusion, and then remove the examples, because I think when it's, you know, if it was displayed to us in an application hearing, we'd all know whether it was a,
yes,
you know,
the general context makes more sense than going into a specific. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. I'm seeing that Councillor Dove I'm seeing some nodding of approval to that in the first instance. I'm going to ask Mrs. Cole if she'd like to come in, please, with regard to that.
Thank you, Chair.
Cole, thank you.
Yeah. I was just going back to the list and really to give more comfort, I suppose, and assurance. Councillor Dove's particular concerns are about these types of venues ending up in industrial estates, which we all agree could be dark and.
I thought we covered that point, Mrs.
Well,
Cole,
we had.
So can we move on to the point which is raised now, please, which is, I think, the relevance is now quite stark. That giving specific examples is not helpful. And just giving an example in the generalities of something that can be grasped and applied is important. Could you comment on that, please? I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Well, I haven't got any comment on that. I'd put my hand up to speak on the other.
I beg your pardon. I thought that we dealt with that we changed the wording. If you were content with that.
Yeah, no, I'm content with the change of wording. I think it's a good idea, and to add regard to proximity and opening hours of the premises, for example. What I was just going to suggest, if it would give any more insurance, and obviously for applicants as well, maybe added to the bullet points, we should include specifically that the area should be well lit and maybe in an area with good transport links.
Oh, I see. So we're not relying on the appendices somewhere else that says something else. Just to see your point. So red hand rule, really. Yes.
Yeah, I knew somewhere in this policy. I know we have talked about transport links and we've talked about being in a lit. So I just thought, because we've got that list, it is quite a detailed list. Maybe we should also add in the list to make it clear for anyone applying. One of the things that, for example, you would be looking at is the area to be in a well-lit area and serve with good transport links.
Yes, thank you for that.
That was all. It's only my suggestion. Obviously, it's your decision.
No, that's a very good addition, because it makes it a red hand rule. It makes it obvious, and we don't have to be scrabbling around to find other clarifications. So I would be content with that. Members, are we content that we make that quite clear with regard to lighting and safety, etc.? It makes sense, doesn't it? I'm seeing some nodding heads. Thank you very much, Mrs. Cole. My apologies for misunderstanding your wish to bring in some further clarity. I'm grateful to you. Councillor Dove, are you now, are we agreed with regards to, we are agreed indeed, but just to get back to you to give you that assurance at 11.5 that we remove these specifics so we don't put in the examples, and with that then we have something which is workable?
If you just remove the 2 bullet points, then the sentence doesn't make sense.
No, not to remove the bullet points, but to put family and child-oriented leisure or shopping areas, which is what Councillor Johnson has put forward.
And yes? Just changing the or to an and to make sure that the shopping areas come under the family and child-oriented.
But I think by that you've got a caveat that it can't be commercial areas. and they can't be residential areas. So there is nowhere you can go.
Uh,
That's the problem. That's the problem, because it's a general rule that immediately we're going to consider it inappropriate. So where else can it go? I don't know if we need 11.5 at all, and whether we actually put in that list predominant family residential areas with or without retail, fast food, etc.
Oh, put it in the list.
Perhaps without the first
I'm
bullet
with you.
point.
So with
though.
regard to specific reference, then it is added in the list as a consideration.
Yeah, so you put the second bullet point in that list above.
I stand.
But not have that family and child orientated leisure and shopping area at all, because it's kind of mentioned above in terms of etc.
Yes, that
and then remove 11.5.
Yeah. Okay. So members, David, if you'd just like to clarify that for us,
Yeah,
your understanding of it, that'd be useful. So members can
take
agree.
out.
Thank you.
I think we should just take out 11.5, and as Councillor Dove says, just put that one bullet point above. I think we're repeating ourselves virtually in that paragraph with the one above, and there's no point in.
I don't think it's giving us any further clarity. It's just confusing the issue. It's just bringing an issue we don't need. So members, are we content then to remove 11.5 and to ensure that that bullet point is included in the list for consideration? Councillor Burton, before members agree.
Just one thought or comment, because BCP, particularly Bournemouth and well, the seafront is slightly different to a lot of areas, isn't it? In that families and school holidays can often be around in non-normal opening times. Because I imagine that's why the pier approach and seafront was actually put there, particularly because walking there late at night, you often see families in school holidays still being around, and we wouldn't want to open establishments like this in that area, even if all the other premises would close. Now, I haven't really added anything to it, but added a slight confusion, haven't I?
No, you haven't added confusion at all, because your statement is absolutely clear. We clearly, as a licensing committee, would not want that, and ergo, if it came before us, we would not accept it. So it's almost by default that it happens. So to state that specifically, it's a default situation. We wouldn't have it. You've just stated that's not what we'd want. I don't think there's anybody in this room who would say that's what they want. So you make a very good point, but it's a default fallback. So it is covered in ergo by that way. Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, I think, in fact, with just what Richard was saying, we have installed with regard to opening times as well. I mean, that wasn't there before, but we have now installed that in the one above, so we can take some of your considerations in on that one as well, if that's okay.
That rubber stamps it, I think, Councillor Burton. Yeah.
I think if we all agree that the beach is open 24 hours a day, I think that's probably.
Indeed. Yes, we do. Okay, members. So we have, I hope I got this right. There's 11.5 we remove, because actually it doesn't really add anything other than just actually argue with a previous point. And for clarification, we remove 11.5, but we include the bullet point family and child oriented leisure and shopping facilities and do the and to or. Is that correct, Councillor Johnson?
I think when we're removing it, it doesn't really matter.
Okay, no, indeed, right. Okay, so family and child orientated leisure or shopping areas. I'm sitting here with my glasses and I'm trying to read it without my glasses, which is a bit dark, but I think that's what it says. Okay, so if are we all content, members? Looking around the room, we are indeed. Thank you very much. And you have that wording, Mrs. Colwick. Thank you very much. Thank you for your advice, Mrs. Cole, and Mrs. Randall. Extremely helpful when trying to clarify these points. Thank you, Councillor Dove. Are we content? For that point, we move on to our next point. Thank you, Councillor Dove.
So I'm happy to give the floor to other people if they like a break from me.
No, I think it's important that you know you're the catalyst. You're starting off the conversations, and we are able to assure and move forward. There's nothing too much as yet. They are tweaks, so to speak, for clarification rather than major development changes. Thank you. When you're ready.
Okay, thank you. 228 under CCTB, point number 30.
Just give us time to get there, Councillor Dove. 228. If you pop 228 in your little box on the left at the top, it takes you right there. I hope. 228. Yes, it works. Okay, thank you. What number?
Number 30.
Number 30, thank you very much.
So we've asked for recordings to be saved for 31 days, which is a industry standard for most of our licensable activities, including taxis and clubs. I think, given the nature that there is likely to be some kind of sexual element to it, the confidence of those who would be affected by any incident, we should ask for it to be longer. When something like this happens, it takes a great degree of courage to come forward and report it. And I think 31 days is not long enough. Most things now are stored on a cloud or discs, etc. We don't have those video VHS tapes anymore. No. And I really do feel very strongly it possibly needs to be longer so that anyone who's aggrieved has the sort of courage to be able to come forward, but know that it can still be investigated.
Yes, because that evidence is still there. It's a very, very good point, Councillor. Can I look to Mr. Williams, please, with regard to the community safety aspect there, and also legal comment. Thank you, Mr. Williams.
As Councillor Dove says, 31 days is the usual for keeping recordings of CCTV. But I think she makes a good point that victims of sexual abuse or harassment may take longer to feel confident in coming forward and reporting those crimes. So, yeah, subject to the technology that the venues have got, I don't think there would be any issue with increasing that time frame.
Okay, thank you. And what would you feel comfortable? I mean, with your great experience in this, because you know you do have great experience in this, and you come here professionally to tell us because of your experience. What do you feel might be a time frame that would be acceptable?
Oh gosh,
3 months.
90 days.
90 days?
Well, that's, sorry, I just heard a little voice pipe up.
Oh, little voice from the front. David's also, Councillor Brown advising us there with regard to tech. Members, 90 days seems fair because it is a difficult aspect for people, some very challenging. It gives them, it's nothing worse than if you've summed up the courage and then all of a sudden there's no evidence there to back it up. So, Councillor Farquhar?
I'd just like to interject there because we had, and I'll be supportive of whatever the term is, that Councillor Brown had to look at the opportunities to actually enable the reporting of harassment, as some of our own members have actually indicated. It's not anecdotal, this is lived experience. But just an answer to that, and with the Me Too movement and so on and so forth, I think we can't put a time limit on an individual who is a victim of a sexual harassment or intimidation or whatever. I would suggest that the time limit should be, because the technology is available, for the entire term of the license of the sexual establishment, the SEV, the sexual entertainment venue. I don't think that puts too much of an onerous responsibility upon that establishment, and it would enable police and other authorities to actually investigate a long term, such as people come to this location on holiday. They may return the following year and only then have the confidence to say, at such and such a location, this happened to me. So I would suggest that to put a time limit of 90 days, a year, whatever, I think we have the opportunity here with the particular type of licensed activity to actually put the onus on them to retain those recordings for the entire time that they have a license and that they are in operation.
That's a pretty tall order, I'd imagine, for any premise, but it's a moot point. Councillor Fear, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The middle ground, which probably still won't please either party on this, is just looking at data protection. So obviously under GDPR, there isn't a premise of time limits regarding blanket data protection, but the emphasis is on no longer than is necessary. Most of those practices then fall under 2 years. So I don't know if that would be a middle ground of meeting that. I'm interested to hear what members think on that, but that's just from.
Okay, so just for clarification for me, because this is all, excellent information for me. The no longer than is necessary caveat, that's a 2-year span, is it?
From my understanding of best practices, yes.
And would the industry be used to that?
From my personal view, I doubt it.
Right.
So obviously that's why, from Councillor Farquhar's point, going in excess of potentially 5 years for the lifespan of the policy and then 90 days. It was just trying to put some context.
I mean, the longer the better, I'm thinking, anybody's eyes, but
I think it's what's manageable.
It's the feasibility of it.
And as well as what should be done. And I just wanted to add the GDPR aspect of it and what the kind of stance is no longer than necessary. That's very broad, and it's for us to discuss what level that should be. So
I'm going to bring Mrs. Cole in, if I may, for the GDPR explanation for those members who need some clarification. Then I'll bring you back, Councillor Dove. Thank you.
Yes, so that is quite true. Information shouldn't be held for no longer than is necessary. So we've got to decide what we think is necessary. My only comment is we've had no comment from the police about that figure of 31, whether they've just missed it or not looked at it particularly. So that is one thing. I fully understand Councillor Dove's view and concerns, and so my view is, I think as long as we're not asking a premises to do anything onerous and which will cost them money, basically, they don't have to, change their CCTV system so that they're able to adapt their systems to provide the longer period, that there's no need for it. I don't think, being in agreement, I wouldn't advise for the length of the license, because I think that does start to get a little bit onerous. But certainly 3 months, even 2 years, if then we're not breaching the duties we have with data protection and holding information, or asking premises to hold information, then that would be fine. But I don't know. I don't know if any of you there have got a bit more technically minded and know. I mean, I heard somebody say they kept on a cloud, but I really have no experience of how this information is kept and how long. And I don't think it'd be appropriate.
Thank you, Mrs. I know I've had some indication of a comfort break, but I don't really want to stop this thread. So if you can wrap this thread up expediently but thoroughly, I'd be grateful. So I'm going to look to Councillor Burton now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. My thought is, and I totally understand where Councillor Farquhar is coming from here, but we mentioned cloud now, thinking for environmental reasons. Video uses quite a lot of data, particularly with video, which is the quality that you can actually use for evidence. Cloud storage is the way to go, but cloud storage has a lot of energy usage, a huge amount of energy usage. Keeping data for that length of time would have a great environmental impact, and cost, but it's particularly the cost. It wasn't my particular, it was the environment which is my concern. Therefore, I do feel that a compromise has to be achieved. I mean, in the 90 days, it's increasing it by 3 times, but I think that's reasonable. Looking at something which may be open for many tens of years would be a huge amount of data.
I mean, the reason behind the request is that part. It's about the person, isn't it? It's about the person who's undergone that horrible experience. We want to be able to protect them. So if we can extend it, we can't make it perfect. We can't give everything, but to try and mitigate that somewhat, I think to extend it 3 times would be acceptable. Councillor Brown, and then I'm going to wrap up on this point. Thank you.
Yeah, just a brief point on that, and I agree with Councillor Burton there, but just to respond to Councillor Farquhar, just from my understanding, these CCTV cameras will be those internal to the premises that are relating to the staff areas and the areas within the premises, and not external CCTV correct, yes. Of the streets of people going past who may be harassed and may report that later. So this is very much for those people visiting the premises and the staff of the premises, isn't it? Not the wider.
Yes, it'll cover all public areas, including booths and VIP
so it's
areas.
not the wider general public who may, an incident that may be exterior to the premises. This is CCTV relating to the premises.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Farquhar, quickly, and then I'm going to sum up.
Just reading through it, actually, it's the Dorset Police that decides what areas are covered. And to my understanding, the Dorset Police expects the entrances, the surrounding area outside where security, etc., operate during the operating hours. So I don't think it's just internal to the premises.
It says the system shall be operational at all times. The premises is open to members of the public and will cover all public areas, including booths and VIP areas. So public areas, I'd imagine, were to be entrance and exit, but not beyond the street, because then we're into GDPR, aren't we? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that clarification. So with that in mind, then, members, are we so minded to accept, gratefully, I think, Councillor Dove's suggestion and proposal, actually, that we go from 31 to 90 days? We are content? Thank you very much. It was an extremely useful conversation. I'm going to give you 10 minutes now for a comfort break. So if everybody could come back, please, at 12:25. Thank you, Richard. Welcome back, everybody. I'm sorry that I didn't acknowledge the 2-hour break, so I hope everybody's comfortable now, and we will begin. So back to you, Councillor Dove, with regard to your further point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is just really to tidy up the paper, so hopefully not too contentious. Page 230.
230, thank you. Just give us a moment to get there. Yes.
So it says dancers may not permit a customer to touch them and dancers may not touch a customer. I don't think we need to put intentionally in there. They're not allowed, full stop. Why give them a defence? They'll just say, well, it's unintentional.
Indeed.
And then that's with the very last point as well. We can take that out there. Don't need to put unless accidental because common sense will dictate. And then obviously the third party for the purpose of restraint is perfectly adequate and needs to be in there.
Yes, I don't see no disagreement to those. Okay. It's just making sense of it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really make sense like that. That's absolutely acceptable. Are members so content? They are indeed. Okay, thank you. Are those noted, Mrs. Holwick? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Dove.
And then if we go to the very top of the next page at 231, it says where they can touch that person for the purpose of restraint. Now, if you've ever tried to restrain someone, it's very hard to do that if you're just going to rely on their chest and limbs, etc. Because I'm presuming we're talking not about sexual restraint, but for the purposes of someone who's being problematic.
Mm-hmm.
So, therefore, I think we just have to say
that's page 31. You said,
yeah, that it is for the purpose of restraint, and you can't say where you can and cannot put hands because
yes,
if you're restraining them, it's going to be a bit of a
too much detail. It's unnecessary. It's restraint required and all. Yes, yeah. I think that's sensible. Members so content. It makes sense, doesn't it? It's silly putting that extra bit in. Okay, so with that tweak, yep, are we happy? Are members all content? Thank you. Moving on, Councillor.
231 Part E. And if the customer attempts to touch or speak to a dancer inappropriately, they should stop. And then it talks about inappropriate behaviour. And if it continues, I think we need to say if it continues a second time.
Could you, take us where you'd like us to be, Councillor?
So Part E on page 231.
Yeah, it's the page number that's useful. Thank you. Yes.
Just so there's no ambiguity as to what continue means. So it doesn't, doesn't keep going on 4th, 5th or 6th time. Mm-hmm. If it continues on a second time.
Yes, thank you. That makes sense. Members content? Councillor Hadley?
Just the wording continues the second time seems a bit odd. Repeated might be better or something like that.
Yes, let's have something which makes sense. Repeated list. The grammar is important, yes, and the context is important. Thank you. Mrs. Colwick's noting all these down so we can materially rely on that these amendments will be made correctly, members. Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Dove.
Thank you. Part H has got intentionally again about touching themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we'll remove that. Makes sense.
Then if you get right the way down to R language, I think one.
Yes, all booths, areas for VIPs used for private dances. Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, and I've asked Councillor Kelsey, who was at West Shore at the time, to correct me. Each booth used to have CCTV as well. Oops, sorry, do you need me to repeat that? Point 6566, I'm pretty sure the previous the SEV policy had that CCTV would be in booths as well, because that's where some of the misdemeanours used to occur.
Okay, is it possible to, this was the Bournemouth policy. Mrs. Randall, if you have the legacy Bournemouth policy to hand, can we check that, or do you recall that being the case?
And if it isn't the case, can we consider it?
Oh, clearly.
Maybe Sarah Rogers could step in because she deals with these venues licensing more closely than I do.
Is Mrs. Rogers with us?
Yes, she is.
Thank you, Mrs. Rogers. If you'd like to appear, be grateful to hear from you.
Yeah, certainly. I will have a look back because off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I will have to just have a look at the Bournemouth Legacy one.
Okay, I mean, that's just a useful inference for Histoire, but actually, even if it wasn't, it seemed a sensible way forward that is so done. Are members so content? Just an added protection, isn't it? This is what we're trying to do.
I believe it was, because I can recall seeing CCTV footage inside booths. So I'll just double check and get back to you.
It would be useful if it was, because then we're not having a material change. We're just iterating what was already in place. So either way, we are content. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Dove. You continue.
I think I finished for now.
Are we done? We're done indeed. Lovely. Okay. So, members, a fairly comprehensive overview of the policy. Extremely grateful to Councillor Dove for taking us through that. I know that others will have had similar comments and similar views, and she would have shot your fox, but that they covered was important. Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your understanding that I don't think there's a personal explanation required, particularly since the discussion has now moved on as regards the ins and outs of what's within the possibilities of the licensing committee to consider. Pretty much my final question relates to something which was brought up as regards licenses being renewed and not being objected to, or having no comment, and perhaps that lobbying or interest groups would have it on their radar. I think it might be useful, e.g. what dates those dates are for renewal. It might be useful, I think, for the public to understand what are the restrictions within law as regards the renewal or the publishing of the renewal of a license for an SEV within a geography, and perhaps a discussion as regards whether or not, as a local authority, we can do anything outside of the law to further promote the advertising that a license is up for renewal, to prompt those discussions within the public sphere.
Okay, thank you for your question. Obviously, we have statute requirements, and we do put it on the website. But perhaps you could first advise us to actually what we do, and what we do statutorily and what we do as an extra. Thank you, Mrs. Randall or Mrs. Cole.
Linda, do you want to say? Or do you want me to?
We're advised in the report that it's necessary that it must go in the paper.
That's right, it goes in the local paper.
It obviously would be on the website, and it obviously is put around on in the local area, so that those passing by and people who live locally will have sight of it. And I believe that all of those are statutory required, and I'm not sure about the information that's put on the website. It may be that we could put extra on, or that is extra in itself. I'll be so advised. Thank you. Councillor Kelsey. One moment, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, just to inform you, Chairman, that we are all now sent a link every week with licensing applications that are now in train. So I'm sure that ward councillors could look at that, and if they so felt necessary, could post that on their relevant web pages that most of us seem to use these days.
Yes, I'm grateful for that reminder, actually, because that's something that Councillor Kelsey and I came up with regard to ensuring that, just like planning, Councillor Kelsey, Chair of Planning, and all planning applications are put up on a monthly basis. And Councillor Kelsey and I felt it was a little unfair that licensing, also quasi-judicial, didn't have that ability for the public and councillors especially to be able to see that it's sent to councillors, and then councillors obviously can share it with their residents once they've had mind of it. So that is an extra, George, if that gives you some assurance of that. So renewals would be coming in within that information.
So just for the watching public, as much respect as I have for councillors and their personal websites, etc., I don't think each ward probably has somewhere in the region of 12,000 residents. And of those, 8,000 voting would be actually following councillors' website. So my question remains, what statutory can we do? So it's published in the press. This is what I heard. So at what point is it published in the press? For how long, if that's repeated? We've been told that it's published on the website, but for how long? And we've been told that, I believe that it's published within the area. So what sphere or what distance from the SEV is that published, and how many notices go up on, let's say, lampposts, etc. So that's what I'm trying to establish.
I think a lot of that you probably know, Councillor Farquhar, but we can have the clarification, please, with regard to statutory requirements. Thank you.
Did you want Sarah to answer this? Because she's the one that
indeed, Sarah, if she's free. Sorry, Mrs. Rogers. Sorry, thank you. I'm so sorry. I was thinking Sarah would be aware that I was asking her to respond. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Mrs. Rogers.
So, if an application for a grant, a renewal, or a transfer, then application has to go into the newspaper, which has to be published within 7 days of the application. And you also put a notice on the premises the day of the application for a period of 21 days. However, the notice period is still 28 days. So objections can still be made up to 28 days from the date of application, although the notice on the site can come down on day 21, which is slightly different to our Licensing Act requirements. And in addition to that, which is not statutory, we also put a notice on our website.
Thank you. And that would be the public access with regard to a notice on the website, and also the public access to those councillors who do talk to their residents would have that notification through the new system which David and I requested and was kindly put in place. Does that assist at all, Councillor Farquhar?
It does. I think it's quite important to understand how well these are advertised, so that it is, for the majority of individuals, I think it is a moral judgment as regards their outlook. And I think it's fairly limited in that they have to be passing the premises themselves to see the yellow notice or the white notice or the blue notice, whatever's actually published on the door, to actually be brought to their attention. As we've heard elsewhere, is that most people are unaware that they have an SEV within the area, but of the, that they walk past perhaps every day. But I think there is the opportunity here to actually engage the public as regards the nature of we've heard here, the picture that we want to present for the BCP geography. But I think that's a discussion for outside the licensing committee. So I thank you very much, Chair, for the answer, and I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for raising, just to clarify, so that the public understand that, and of course, hopefully some of the public might be listening, that we have statutory rights, but we're also in addition trying to assist the public so that they understand when these renewals are up, and they do have an absolute right for objection. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Mrs. Cole. Oh, you're on mute. Oh, mic down, Mrs. Cole, mic down.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I just wanted to step in just while I understood Councillor Farquhar there. He mentioned some members of the public might just have a moral view, and we've discussed morals already a lot in response to the earlier questions. So it's just to clarify, the licensing committee or the licensing authority can't take purely moral judgments into consideration when they're making their decisions on these licenses, as you well know, Chair, and I'm sure most of you know it, sitting on the licensing committee. Obviously, it's very important when we're making these decisions and when considering policies like we are today, that we've got to separate out what is the sort of public safety objections and what are moral objections, and that's we have done using the equality impact assessment. But just for Councillor Farquhar going forwards, if objections on a particular application came in and it was purely a moral objection, then at that point the licensing team would go back to that objector to advise them it wasn't a relevant consideration.
Which is only fair in all the circumstances, so that they understand it. Maybe that they'd like to bring in then a different objection, which didn't have a moralistic view, so that they're advised, because they're absolutely entitled to bring their objections forward. Thank you very much, members. So are there any further points? Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a very simple one. It's on page 234.
Give me a moment just to get there. Thank you. My number in 234. Yes, thank you. Number?
Number 20, paragraph 25.
Yep.
It may seem a little bit odd in this sort of policy, but in terms of equalities, we talk about people having name badges showing his name and that he is an employee. Should we not make that gender neutral?
Well, yes, there's no problem there, I'm sure.
Showing their name.
Yeah, showing the name, that's absolutely fine. Thank you for raising that, because I think that was just a miss out there, Councillor Hadley, and thank you for spotting that. Absolutely. We can do that, certainly. Are members so content? They are. Councillor Dove?
Sorry, I'm just very confused. It's every employee, so we're not talking about the self-employed people, are we? Because I'm just thinking it'd be a bit ouch when naked performers were theirs.
I think it's employee. I think we're talking about the management. We're talking about this.
Through the chair, this is about sex shops, not about the attendant.
I'm really sorry. Yes, let's hope they're all fully clothed in there then. I'm really sorry.
Indeed. That was so recorded. Never mind. Okay, right. Yes, thank you for raising that. I'm sure we're also content. So, members, are there any other points with regard to Councillor Fear? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to go back through the majority of the points and just covering a few things really. As sitting on licensing today, which I don't usually do, but I have been involved with this paper. As I'd say, what brilliant work it is really, first of all, going through and the discussions we've had and all the points being raised from the codes of conduct regarding the dancers, customers, staff training, staff welfare, policy of character. I think that's very important going forward. Obviously, every application is on its own merit. Some phrases I would have to disagree with earlier on. I just want to make sure, I've been born and bred in Bournemouth, and I've had family both in Port and Christchurch, and some of the remarks regarding our three towns I don't see. Like Councillor Kelsey said earlier, under Bournemouth Council, there was very little complaint. It was well managed, and I feel that this policy meets up to that high standard. It was great to have Mr. Johnson, who said overall he's happy with this, with the qualities. I think that was very important to get that right. Mr. Williams, in support of data gathering going forward, with Councillor Brown's point, that's very important of making our minds in the next, in 5 years' time. Having data is extremely important. In regards to outside venues, I understand concerns. Obviously, the police have been involved. They seem to be supportive of this policy, which is very important. So obviously, outside venues, that's where the police should have a very big active role, which I would like to see in harassment allegations, etc. And I feel they will be taking that very seriously from my discussions. And this is a living and breathing document, and I hope that licensing move this forward to full council as it is now after the changes. And this will then become a living and breathing policy. There are avenues of recall if issues happening around these licensed premises. And going forward, every application is judged on its own merits. So in that aspect and going through this policy, I think I'd just like to say well done to the officers, well done to the working group, well done to this licensing board. I think it's been a really good discussion, and I think we've got a really good policy that embodies the positive principles of BCP Council now. So I'd just like to put that on record and congratulate everyone on that work.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman of Council. Indeed, your words are well taken, and thank you for that. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go back one person as to what Councillor Hadley said a moment ago, because I took the opportunity to type in his into the search bar. It comes up 614 times in the document. I think some of it might not be his, it might be there, but it is. But for instance, on page 232.4, it talks about his absence and him in writing. 4.5 sex temperature in his absence. Therefore, if we're going to change it in that one particular place,
yes, makes sense.
Maybe
we can certainly do that. Yeah, it's not a problem. It's something which is done amongst documents, and I'm sure that to make it gender neutral is absolutely acceptable and isn't a problem. And we would expect it actually, especially with our own. Are we content? We are. Okay, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, no more points, no more. I'm sorry?
We're discussing cats.
If you've got some other point to raise, Councillor Duff, please do. Thank you.
Okay, so this is going to be obviously me poking a stick at a hornet's nest. As raised at the seminar that we had, I have great concerns that we are not setting a limit and we don't have a cap on the number of SEVs within the locality. The reason for that is I do believe, because it is such a competitive nature, that they end up self-policing and ensuring that they abide to all of the rules in the strictest terms, because there is always someone in the wings waiting to step in, and that's what gives it the quality. That's what is preventing or stops or prevents the clubs coming back so frequently to us. Is why we have or see very little disorder related to those clubs. I think if we allow more than, and I'll put an arbitrary figure of 3 out there, I think it will end up becoming, I think the fear of losing that license is reduced and diminished. So therefore I would really, and I'm very uncomfortable having no cap at all, and therefore I would like to propose that we have at least a cap of 3. And I don't know if I've got a seconder.
We'll discuss it. Okay, we'll discuss it. I mean, you don't have a seconder at the moment, but we'll so discuss. So it's a fair point made. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to put out some of the thinking that we obviously had as a working party behind it. And I think that most of it came from the fact that we are now 3 towns and 3 distinct areas, and putting a cap onto Poole that has never had a cap, or onto Christchurch which has never had a cap, it would be guesswork and very hard to defend.
And unfair.
And you know, in some ways, we hope it will be a moot point in that there has never been one in Christchurch. We don't expect there to be one in Christchurch because it's just there's going to be no business for it there. And the same is probably true of Poole, because their policy didn't have a cap, but there have been not even any applications there for years and years and years. And so I don't think that this will have any material effect upon Poole or Christchurch, but guessing in terms of imposing a cap, I think could open us up to some serious difficulties in defending that decision if somebody did choose to apply in Poole, because we'd have no basis as to why we decided that there shouldn't be any. But I think also the issue within Bournemouth is that, again, we haven't had any applications. I don't think we will have particularly more, but we've also made sure, and one of the thinkings was that given the exhaustive list that we've already been through in detail before, that there is plenty of restriction to make sure that we don't suddenly get a glut of them coming forward. And even if we do get one more, I don't think one more element of competition will make venues too afraid about losing their, or not afraid enough about losing their license. So again, that's just putting forward, I think, the thinking that went through the working party's discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Toby, for that factor. It's certainly quite a factor of equality with regard to the 3 towns. It would be difficult to defend with something that we did discuss, because obviously a cap was the next one up from zip, was the sort of the next one up from 0, really. So that certainly was discussed. Councillor Burton, thank you.
Yes, if I may, if I remember correctly, Chair, and thank you, the cap was discussed at a previous committee, pre-working party, and for exactly the reasons that Councillor Duff was mentioning. If I remember rightly, it's relying on memory here, we discussed it because we decided that having the competition between establishments created more safety. Because if an establishment wasn't treating its people who were working there correctly, they could set up an establishment themselves, and we would want to avoid the possibility of one person owning all 3 clubs.
Indeed.
And therefore getting rid of that competition and therefore safety.
Yes, thank you for that further clarification. It's extremely helpful, Councillor Burton. I'll bring in Mrs. Cole, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We did agree to lift the cap, though, didn't we, in March?
I think it was the 10th of December meeting.
Oh, was it 10th of December?
Sorry, yes, it was the 10th of December meeting that the cap was lifted, and the minutes will be available if we want to refresh our or your minds. It was just while you're talking about lifting or putting a cap back on, it's sort of like a two-part thing, because you will have to consider the locality as well. So if you're putting a cap on, will that be a cap for the whole of BCP? Or are you going to, while you're having your debate and discussing it, thinking about it, you've got to then consider if you're going to have a locality boundary, as the old Bournemouth policy did. They had a cap on numbers and a cap on area, and that area previously in Bournemouth, or is still on the Bournemouth policy, in that very small town centre area where the 3 existing venues are positioned. So it's just something for you all as you consider and debate what you're going to do.
Thank you. Further points? No. Well, we had a clarification as to why the Working Party and indeed the Licensing Committee prior to from Councillor Burton decided that a cap was not something that was feasible in equity and also with regard to the competition. So I believe it myself with regard to this point that I'm content with that. I feel assured with that. But Councillor Duff, it would be a matter for you if you didn't feel content with that, then obviously you would need to consider that for yourself.
Thank you, Chair, and it's only because I am fortunate that I had the benefit of hindsight, having obviously been on the previous licensing board, and I know it's not just obviously about the performers but how they treat their customers too. And when it was that we called a club in for review, you could quite clearly see the white of their eyes. It was absolutely clear that they could not afford to lose their licence, because we had this cap. Once lost, there was already a competitor ready to go in there, and that opportunity would have been lost for good. I don't mind increasing the limit, or we look at localities and how many each town have, etc. Just to have no capital, I do believe we will have them people coming in asking to increase it, and there is this danger, therefore, as we've sort of heard in the consultations, etc., that we're going to be known more for the homes of SEVs than anything else, and I'm sure that's not really something that we want for our conurbation.
I think I do see your dilemma, but I think that we've had the opportunity where these establishments could be applied for, and people didn't apply for them, and that has sat since Licensing Act. So for the last, since 2003, people have had the ability to do that, and they haven't. It has been very much in the quarter of Bournemouth because it's a hip hop and happening town, and it's got a fantastic nighttime economy, so it's tended to centre there. So I think the opportunity has been there for a considerable number of years. People haven't taken that up. I can't see that there's going to be a huge market change. It's almost like I want to assure you, but obviously I don't have a crystal ball. But I think based on what we've got in the background, based on what the Working Party considered, based on what this committee in itself has considered, I sit comfortably with there being no cap. But that's my personal opinion, and we all have that today. So, Councillor Farquhar, did you want to? You were just waving at me. Okay, Councillor Kelsey, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for what you just said, Jem. I do tend to agree with you, and I also totally understand where my colleague here, Councillor Dove, is coming from. We have the cap of 3. I think with what we've all discussed here this morning, with the amendments that we've made to this policy, I think if it were me wanting to open another club in this town, I'd be running a mile. Just some of the restrictions that we've actually put into this policy to make it so goddamn difficult for us to open one. I think it would be virtually impossible, or you'd have to be a really rich person to want to go through all the leaps that we put in for anyone to want to do it. Obviously, that is not to say that no one will ever come back and say we want to try. But the remit of this panel here this morning, and any future panel that sits, be I on it or not, we will be able to take into account every application that comes in front of us, and it will be for us here, the 15 people that sit on the licensing committee, to decide whether or not we feel that premises should be there. And it will be up to us to make sure that they are adhering to what we've put into this policy this morning, This policy is taking longer than I've ever known any other policy to come through. I mean, normally we've got them through in one sitting, but to come back for a third sitting on a policy, it makes me think everyone's had a really good read of this and is fully understanding of what is in the policy and what is required of us as a licensing committee to fulfil this policy, and not just us, but the officers as well. And therefore, I think any right-minded person would probably not want to try and apply for a new licence.
I hope that gives Councillor Duff some assurance. It's really difficult.
I hope so, Chair.
A really difficult one for her, but I'm really glad that you felt that you could raise it, Councillor Duff, and thank you for putting it forward. Ergo members, I believe, Linda, you have your hand up. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It was only to point out, if it gives comfort to those that are concerned about this point, if you go back to your list in para 11.2, the last bullet point, it does actually, what you'll be considering will be the number, type and concentration of other sex establishments already in the locality. So that will be something as a new application comes in that you will be set out in your policy that you will be considering. So it's another little bit of security.
It certainly covers for the Bournemouth nighttime economy area. Thank you very much. The members, are there any other point? I think we've had a very, very comprehensive discussion. I don't think there's any area that we haven't looked at in great detail. I'm extremely grateful for your questions and your challenges. It's really important, and also to the public questions and the public statements and their challenges, because we have to be mindful. We must be mindful. We need to get this right. We have a proposal in front of us, and I believe that we're probably ready to go to the proposal now. I'm looking around the room. I can't see any new points. And it's recommended that the committee considers the consultation feedback and council recommendation from the workshop, and ergo then, A, agree the final version of the policy. I think we'll need to pop in as amended because we've had a few little tweaks, yeah. And B, recommend that the final version of the policy to council for approval. So are we so minded? So I will ask then, all those in favour, please show. Okay, and any against? And any abstentions? We have 2 abstentions. Your abstention is with regard to your declaration, Councillor Farquhar, or with regard to this point?
No,
with regard to the declaration, okay. It will be indeed. There's a set understanding there with Councillor Farquhar's abstentions. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, members. We now move on to, just about to go home then, we now move on to the next agenda item. Let's just find this, go back to our agenda. So we're going on to our forward plan, which we will find in a moment. Sorry, taking a while, computer's very slow. Right. Forward plan, so that is page 327. So are we all in the room? We are, okay. So we have a forward plan, which is data. So new BBC sex establishment policy. We've actually covered that today in great detail. And we've covered the gambling policy. And the outcome of that was for the BCP sex establishment policy as approved by this committee will now go to council on November the 14th. Thank you. We look then to the 9th, November the 9th. We looked at the draft BCP gambling statement, and that will now go out to consultation. And we have also item 3, which is the update on taxi private hire policies. Now, it's important. We agreed that we would renew this on a regular basis, so we thought it best to bring this forward to be renewed in December. And the committee has requested that this item be retained the forward plan to enable the newly adopted BCP taxi and private hire policies to be monitored up until the end of the next review. So I'm going to go to Mrs. Randall, who's going to advise us as to next steps as to what we hopefully will be doing in December. Thank you, Mrs. Randall.
Thank you. So the BCP taxi private hire policies for vehicles, drivers and operators came into force on the 1st of June this year, and we've been implementing that. It's been an interesting journey, I think, for both us as the licensing team and the licensed trade, and we are in communication with the licensed trade. And obviously, because it was such a big area of work and such a big sort of change really for everybody, this is why it wanted to be reviewed, because there will be sort of some tweaks, I think, needed to the policy, certainly that we found from the implementation side, and also feedback that we've been receiving from the trade, who I believe would probably want to come along to a meeting committee to bring their thoughts to you direct. And I think we did look at December, but that may well be sort of approaching slightly too soon, and that only does give 6 months of sort of feedback. So you might want to maybe look at it in the new year. I'll leave that up to the chair to consider. But we'd like to. We are in communication. I know Andy Williams has been meeting with the trade as well to discuss the implementation of the policy. So this was a good way of receiving feedback on how that was going. So it's when you would like it to come back to you, really, whether you would like it to come back to the full meeting in December or maybe in the new year, bearing in mind all the things that we've had going on this year. It's quite, it's still a big piece of work to pull all that together as well.
Thank you very much. I think you're quite right, Mrs. Randall. I think the taxi trade, are very busy at Christmas time, and it might be unfair to ask them. We would want everybody to be here, and they're going to be extremely busy, so it's not perhaps the best time. So once the New Year period's finished and they're at a less busy time, I think it would be more appropriate to invite them then. Are we so content? Yes. So can we leave you to do the details? And I omitted to ask, with regard to our gambling policy, I'd like to ask for members to indicate, please, to Mrs. Randall as to whether you would like to sit on a working party. I think we'll need we've had working parties for taxi, we've had working parties for sex establishment. But the working parties work well because they're a conduit for the rest of the members, and I think it enables us to move forward. Not exactly quickly, but thoroughly. Okay, so if you could indicate to Mrs. Randall, please, if you'd like to sit on the working party, it will be 5 members, and then you'd like to sit? No. Who's just?
I was just going to ask, do we actually need a working party for the gambling policy? Because I think most people were quite content with it this morning.
I think I see your point, Councillor Kelsey, but even if we just meet once, just for thoroughness and also for continuity, we've had working parties for the other work, so it may be that we only need to meet once to consolidate what we already got in our 3 legacy policies and take that forward. Okay, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you would indicate then to Mrs. Randall if you'd like to sit on that working party, and we can advise you by email as to who will be sitting on it and give you the date when it begins. Okay, thank you. So with that said, I believe that is the end of the business of the day. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. We certainly have deliberated for quite a period. I believe we're 1 o'clock now, so I believe we spent over 2 hours debating this particular point with regard to sexual establishment, which has been important. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope in council that your reserve will be as robust, and we look forward to the debate there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Oh, and a grateful thanks also to our officers, I have to say, for their work, and I will name them. That's Mrs. Cole, that's Mrs. Randall, Mrs. Rogers, Mr. Williams, Mr. Sam Johnson, our equalities, and of course our members here, our officers here today, Mrs. Colwick, who's our clerk, and the forgotten man behind the blackout mask, Mr. Jones, who's done all our tech. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day.